Okay, now you're awake. Let us talk. Let us talk of tribal class destroyers and Norway. Let us talk of all the little things they may or may not have got up to. And seriously, it's quite disturbing. Now, I've not done the normal Patreon thing because there isn't really a PowerPoint for this. Because the PowerPoint for this, if I did, it was going to make it would be pretty much excerpts from the book. So, if you haven't got a copy of this book and you're interested in it, there is a link down below that should take you to wherever Amazon can sell it. If you can't get Amazon in your region to sell it to you, then there is always in the UK and Europe, Pen and Sword Books website. If you're in North America and the South Americas, I think it's USNI. Speaking of which, there will be some signatures finally arriving back with Pen and Sword this week, so, they'll be able to start sending out signed copies of books. And what else was I going to say? Yes, while I'm getting into this and while I'm talking about books, well, I've had a very interesting message in a couple of chats. And I won't know whether this is confirmed till February, but someone has offered to potentially pay for me to go out and see Haida and give a talk because it's her 80th birthday this year. And that will be in June. And what I've decided is whatever happens, whether they come back and it's paid for or not, I will find the money to go to see Haida in June this year. Now that's going to cost me all in probably about £2,000. Which I have no idea how I'm going to get the money together. I have no idea where I'm going to get it from. Let's hope the funders fund. But if they don't, I will figure something out. But if I am going there, and even if the lovely people who want to organise the public talk and that all that stuff don't manage to pull it off, I will, of course, do what all good academics do, usually when they're wandering around the world, which is make sure if there's the local university history department in Hamilton, send a message and see if they would like me to give a talk. If they have a program like King's College London's does of publics that have his visiting historians giving public talks, and if they do have a space and do want me to talk, I'd be very happy to do so. But I haven't contacted them yet. I haven't contacted Haida yet to and the organisations that would look after her, see if they would mind me doing the filming, because I said theoretically if this group is doing the funding, they'll sort all that out and be happy to sort out all that. If though it doesn't come off, I will start sorting them out, so that's going to have to wait till February. But basically, the plan is to, in June, come and see HMCS Haida. And, of course, the last remaining tribal class destroyer, which is rather appropriate to announce for this video. The thing is, it won't just be me going, because, and you have to love him for this, Drac turned around and went, "So you'd be going on your own?" Yeah. And this is even if I'm paid for, I'd of course be going on my own. And he's turned around and said, I'll come with. So it will be me and Drac NFL coming to see HMCS Haida in June this year. It's going to be fun. And as said, if the lovely people who are offering to fund and pay for the trip because they want to give me a talk because I think it's something to do they're planning to do for her 80th birthday celebrations that's great. And I'll make sure the public talk is advertised and you'll know, and anyone who knows is more than welcome to come along to it. I'm not sure if they'll be charging tickets or what they'll be doing, but anyhow. But if they don't, I will try and organize those sorts of things to try and hopefully do some fundraising and promotion for Haida. Because she is the last remaining tribal class destroyer. And as such, she carries the burden of 27 sisters who served, including herself, and 5 sisters who only ever sailed on paper. So she is an important ship, and she matters. Right, I'm now going to start doing my normal thing of going through the chat. And then I'm going to start reading from the book, and then I'm going to start talking to you about other stories, which are not in the book, because I couldn't reference them enough to put them in the book. Hello, Carl McGasberg. Hello, Frank Sparkling. Hello... Oh, Frank Sparkling. Let's see, I recently realised that in the same time the world was battling for naval dominance, with new modern ships of steel and steam, the USA was still playing cowboys and Indians. The USA is always playing cowboys and Indians, and that's one of the endearing things about the USA. There is never not a time in the USA's history where there have not been men on horses chasing cows around. And women on horses chasing cows around. Let's be honest, there have been far more Annie Oakleys than are actually given credit. Because it's kind of like in Australia. The frontierswomen do not get much attention at all. And the reason I know about them and bring them up is I have so many great aunts, and if you go back to them who were involved in those things, who were definitely leading from the front and probably telling the men what to do most of the time, judging by the current family. Yeah, most of us are blonde, but some of us are brunette, and a fair number are redheads in my family, and that temper does show through. Hello, Peter Dawson. Hello, Ian Stradling. Is that like having a bow is overrated? It's amazing. I'm open to a page where HMS Eskimo is on. I'm talking about Norway, of course. Eskimo's coming up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that in the corner. So you have you always have a tribal class destroyer on display. Now, I've got 27 odd pictures, and every single tribal class destroyer is in them, but some will appear multiple times because there are some multiple pictures. Frank Steiner, what would the UK have done with Alaska if it had remained part of Canada? How much would that have affected history? What would the UK do in World War II when Japan invaded? Well, for starters, Alaska was part of Russia, which was sold to America. It was called American Rus, or Russian America, and it was traditionally actually run by the Imperial Russian Navy. They would probably have sold it. If they'd sold it to the UK instead. The odds are, if the Japanese had decided to invade Alaska, they would not have liked it. There is a tradition of people invading Canada, finding it really not full of polite people who collapse. It's full of very polite people who are absolutely polite, right up until they realise what they do for their national sport. Which means when it comes to fighting, they are pretty mean and nasty. And I have survived playing ice hockey versus Canadians. It's not something I recommend. It was something I did in my teenage years, and I have not done it since. But I did survive. But there are a few colleagues who were very brave and doughty, but boy did they fall fast. Me, luckily I have the build and stability of a tank. And a fairly decent right hook. We'll leave that to one side. It was an interesting experience, but it also taught me why you do not invade Canada. Don't invade Canada. They might look nice. They are very nice people, but don't invade Canada. Don't. Because that's what... If Japan had invaded Canada, then the experience would have been, by the time the British and the Americans got there to support to try and do anything, they probably would have found the Japanese going, please, please, accept our surrender now. Just keep them away. And that's before you consider the natural nature of the people who tend to live in Alaska. Let's see. Hello in 35 minutes. Hello, Peter Dawson. Oh, Frank Sparto. Does it? Where is there? What is some good info on Ilbing class torpedo boats? Would you say they are probably Germany's most effective class of warship in World War II? They were the only German ships to sink a tribal. They were certainly some of the luckiest ones they had in World War II. Hello, Alzaski. Hello, Nautic Wolf. Hello, Knight 6831. Hello, DH89. Hello, Paul Beswick. Knight 6831. The thing no one ever considers about Incomparable is she would have been put up or shut up to USA. If they can't, then they have to accept second power status to the UK. To be honest, I can't see the USA accepting second power status to the British Empire. You see, the thing is, the Americans building Incomparable, you can say that, but for the Americans to match Incomparable, they would have to spend a lot. The Senate would have to spend a lot of money on the Navy. And as we've been over many, many times, the Senate and spending money on the Navy is not something they like to do. In fact, it's something they have quite a lot of trouble doing. So, as much as I do believe you are correct in terms of terminology, I think they might claim the Montanas or the Equals or something, just even though they don't have 20-inch guns. They don't need the biggest guns, they just have the biggest meanest battleships or something. And to be fair, on the second power status, the US actually in the treaty system does accept to have less tonnage of cruisers than the Royal Navy. Once you look at the London Naval Treaty. Okay, it's only 15,000 tons difference from memory, but it is less tonnage. And yes, the US has allowed more heavy cruisers than the British, but you have to start arguing whether the more numerous light cruisers the RN's allowed will make up for the lesser number of heavy cruisers. And the odds are, in terms of ship availability, they probably will do. Hello, Paul Beswick. Hello, DG40. Hello, Matthias Slavic. Hello, Knight Heron. Oh, good lord. Hello, Timi Looker. Hello, Anna Paul. Hello, Carl van Gasberg. Hello, George Newman. Hello, Jenworth. Hello, John Shea. Hello, the Shrike 616. Haven't seen you in a while, I think. Hello, Race Car Meerkat. Hello, Frank Zachary Gherkin. Hello, Seben Kavru. Hello, George Newman. Thank you. Stephen Richards. Hello. Your book arrived Friday. I hope you're enjoying it. Loving the book. That's love. I'm glad to hear that. I like to hear all this. Hi, Dan Freeman. Jonathan Grant. I'm a slow reader. I got the book for Christmas. Managed to get to the Hunt for the Bismarck. Hope you're enjoying it. Hello, Bud Guy 8829. Hello, Frank Salto. Hello, Thomas Albaloni. What's on? Hello. Thank you, Yodi Sage. Super chats are being very much appreciated at the moment. Everything is going towards doing that trip. Colin House, I am now there. Fan earphones in. All right. And a report, folks. As we start the topic of the illustrious, really loves to discuss Tribe Plus Noise. Please remember to give a like. Thank you. Aviator Enterprise. Just got your book in the mail earlier this week. Hope you enjoy it. New IQA 4772. Hello, everyone. Hello. You Sage. Hello. And thank you for the super chat again. And hello. Oh, good lord. There is Skamaker. Dramatic battle on Haida. Nice. Incomparable. If Hood Incomparable being built, would she have taken Hood's place as Pride of the Royal Navy? Yeah, she'd have been the biggest. Basically, the Pride of the Royal Navy is whatever the biggest ship it has. That's why there's currently a debate, because technically it's supposed to be the Queen Elizabeth, but the Princess of Wales is actually slightly bigger. Yes, even in the modern age, and building two ship styles, exactly the same plans, the Prince of Wales is slightly longer. Just ever so slightly, but it's slightly longer. Hello Kilo 19, hello Ian Winter, hello in car. Ooh. Didn't GSL? Didn't the Russians sell Alaska to the Brits? Didn't get it. Don't get it. That's to an extent their plan, their cunning plan. Sell it to the Americans and hope it causes trouble. It actually didn't cause trouble. It just the Americans then turned around and said to the Brits, "Are you prepared to build a road through Canada to get to Alaska for us?" And the British went, "Go on." So that road was helpful to the British. Hmm. All right then. Tashi to Vachel. How long is a Canada trip that costs 2,000? Oh, sorry, it's curious. It seems a bit expensive. Well, that's including the accommodation, renting the car, and the flights. And the plan is to be out there for roughly a week, if not a week to 9 days. And the reason for that is if I'm again, this is if I'm paying for it myself and I'm going there. And the reason I'm doing that and I'm going out there for that long is because I want to see Haida. Um, Also, it's Hamilton is close enough to Niagara Falls. I'd like to do that. I'd like to go into the archives, and that's the other thing. If you're going to the archives, you need to have, and you're going that distance. One day in the archives is not going to be enough. So it's probably going to be 4 days with Haida, probably. 1 day for filming, 1 day to survey her, go around her, and a couple of days for the archives and to possibly go see Niagara Falls. And then probably another 4 days to go to Halifax and see the lovely flower class they have there. Because, in nicest way, I don't know about any of you, but I don't make these trips to Canada that regularly and that often. I, I haven't yet managed to get to the levels of my good colleague who's doing lovely America trips, and I'm saying all power to him. Although I am slightly jealous because I'd love to do them, but no. And so this is going to be it. And if I'm going to be paying for the flight across there, I might as well spend the time in the archives. So there's the archives in Halifax as well, and so I want to look around there. Flower class Corvette. I'd like to go and talk about her and sort of do some stuff about her. And I will, these ships, they mean a lot to me to see. So it's a case of I'm sort of budgeting it so I have a day to go around them and then do a day's filming filming the next day sort of thing, so I can go around them and work out what I'm going to be filming and how I'm going to approach the filming before I actually do the filming. Because for me to see Hyther, it's a big thing. So that's the reason why it costs that much. It's sort of a case of it's a week being there. It's economy plus economy plus travel premier. The slightly bumped up from economy rather than business class seating. To try and get keep the price down. I have to admit, and my mum has critiqued this, that the fact that I have the car I've chosen as the rental car that I'm going to treat myself to is a little bit more powerful and a little bit bigger than she thinks I precisely need. She said, "You didn't exactly go for the economy car option." I went, "I've gone for the most survivable flight option. I've gone for but still economy, and I've gone economy premium, and I've gone for accommodation, which is fine. I've got Hilton points thanks to my work, and so I'm staying in the hotel I'll be using in Canada is the Hiltons, because the points I build, they get paid. My accommodation for one of my jobs always sticks us up in the Hilton in the UK. So you build up points on your card and just go, right, then might as well use them for this. So that gives me money off for that and quite nice accommodation. But I have to admit, currently the car I've got spec'd is a Dodge Charger. Okay, so Dash to Vashal, that explains that one. Yeah, that's for that many days, but no. Plus, it's about an 18-hour drive or flight from Hamilton to Halifax. And, you know, if I'm going to be doing it that far, I want a decent car to drive in. Don't worry, Strike 616, I'm just glad to see you. Just Atkins, I literally recently came across the DGX design proposal. Have you seen it? If so, do you think it's a credible design to use that to be used in Cruiser Roll? Go to the first episode of Bilge Pumps from this year. You'll find me and Drac taking it to pieces, quite literally. Hello, Roland. Hello, Huel. And give my best to your wife. Thanks, what? Is there even a debate as to which KGB was longest like the others do? Yep. Ian Winter, you and Drac should do a chat talk event in London. I would come. It's not that far from Hamilton. We might. Depends. If it's going to sound strange, if the very nice people who are talking about organising it do put it on and organise it, then that's a good thing because it means it's less effort for me. But if they don't, and I end up organising and paying for it off my own back, and me and Drac, then there's a sort of easier thing for us because we can organise it to be where we think it's best for people and where it's best for where we can best do it. You know, I'd love to give a talk on HMCS Hyder herself and do a talk near her, but I'm not sure if that'd be possible. Dan Freeman, read Queen Elizabeth from British Welsh. Can I see HMCS Queen Elizabeth sticking... sticking a flagpole on the bow to sort of be slightly longer? They might try. So what would a 1930 Norwegian coastal defence ship look like? How would they have performed? Why would they likely be built? And how good is that Norwegian didn't buy the Blackburn Beaufort? Probably they would have looked like a few of the classes which they'd already built, Gainsborough class, and possibly like the vessels which ended up being the Royal Navy's monitors in World War One. They'd probably been built in Britain again. That's their options. Build them in Norway or build them in Britain. And they've probably gone for Britain. Not a wolf. Will you have to quarantine back in the UK? And how much would that factor in? Technically shouldn't have to quarantine because I'm triple vaccinated. And it's going to Canada, which is considered sort of okay at the moment, especially by June. But honestly, I won't know until we're closer to time because they keep changing things around. Hello, Nook. Not a wolf. Would pilgrimage be out? Perhaps. Of course, you just beg to charger. Well, it is me and Drac. You know, we can't be. We have to have a decent car to drive. I normally drive a Subaru. That wasn't available, so it was a case of, right then, what is the most Subaru-like car here? Okay, that'll do. I like that. It's Sackville, yeah. Anyway, so let's start off with the Altmark incident. In the 1930s, after the failure of the Hague Convention to reach any agreement on territorial waters, most countries still observed the 3-mile limit as the extent of national waters. This distance was defined in the 18th century by a Dutch judge, Cornelius van Bickerstock, because it was at that time the maximum range of a cannon. Yeah. Up until the 1930s, the maximum of the territorial waters had been defined in the 1700s by someone based on the distance a cannon could fire. Whatever the questionable logic behind it, this was the distance that still mattered in February 1940. Furthermore, and I there were a couple of people who went, do you have to put that line in? I went, yes. Questionable logic is fine. This was the distance that still mattered in February 1940. Furthermore, considering that the pertinent events of the Altmark incident largely took place inside Jøssingfjord, it could be argued that they actually took place in Norway, let alone within its territorial waters. That, though, did not matter to the Navy or Churchill, who was First Lord of the Admiralty at the time. This was a battle at the start of a long war in which merchant seamen would be a lifeblood of the Battle of Atlantic. And here were a number of experienced sailors who could be rescued and who could provide critical and successful intervention would halt the German government claiming any more victories. Who could prove critical and successful intervention would halt the German government claiming any more victories from the crews of the Grass Bay and play well for domestic political consumption, for which the Battle of the River Plate had already proved critical to morale. Most importantly, it would be a statement of intent and confidence from the most powerful navy in the world at the time that it would do whatever was necessary to win the war that was to come. However, it does not mean that the 1908 Hague Convention was either irrelevant or unimportant. Article 1. Belligerents are bound to respect the sovereign rights of neutral powers and to abstain, in neutral territory or neutral waters, from any act which would, if knowingly permitted by any power, constitute a violation of neutrality. Article 2. Any act of hostility, including capture and the exercise of the right of search, committed by belligerent warships in territorial waters of a neutral power, constitutes a violation of neutrality and is strictly forbidden. Article 3. When a ship has been captured in the territorial waters of a neutral power, this power must employ, if the prize is still in its jurisdiction, the means at its disposal to release the prize to its officers and crew and to intern the prize crew. If the prize is not in the jurisdiction of the neutral power, the captive government, on the demand of the power, must liberate the prize with its officers. The first three articles of the treaty, 13 of the 1907 Hague Convention, are as explicit as diplomatic language ever gets. A total of 33 articles provided the basis for the security of merchant shipping then and now. Yes, it still applies today. In 1940, it was the mantra which not only the Royal Navy but everyone was supposed to follow. The taking of the Altmark would violate Article 1, although that was only proved by the operation, an operation which would violate Article 2, although the Navy would be very good about not violating Article 3, as tempting as the capture of a merchant ship might have been. It was from Cossack that Captain Vian commanded the operations during February 1940, a command which would propel Cossack and the tribals into the public eye. On the 14th of February 1940, she put to sea with her sisters Maori, Sikh, Nubian, two 1936-37 completed I-class destroyers, Intrepid and Ivanhoe, both of which were fitted as mine layers, and Arafusa, a 1934 completed light cruiser of the class bearing her name. I.e. enough firepower to sink a small task force. This force was officially at sea to intercept German IR ships in the Skagerrak. It was a capable and well-armed force for such a mission. Its strength had been further supplemented by having its influenza-affected crewmen replaced with crew from Arafusa's sister, Aurora. These were then organised into boarding parties. Don't take this the wrong way, but the normal patrol force for the merchant ships coming out of Skagerrak involved our merchant cruisers. Not 6 fleet destroyers and a light cruiser, all strengthened with extra boarding parties. The force was thus substantial enough and well provided and efficient enough to take on normally lightly crewed and lightly or unarmed merchant ships. Whatever the true mission, and despite a number of educated guesses we are unlikely ever to know, it was on the 15th of February the force learnt that the Kriegsmarine supply vessel Altmark with an estimated 300 British merchant seamen prisoners captured by Graf Spee during its raiding, was near Trondheim. Altmark was within Norwegian territorial waters, posing as a merchant ship. This was illegal under international law because she was carrying prisoners, so was technically a combatant. What the Navy was about to do would also be a violation of that law. With these issues in mind, after much fruitless discussion in the Norwegian Navy, and at the urging of the First Lord of the Admiralty, which had Churchill on 16 February, Cossack alone entered into Jossingford to verify Altmark's merchant status. As she approached, Altmark turned on her searchlights to try to dazzle the bridge crew, whilst at the same time manoeuvre in an attempt to crush Cossack. It was here that the manoeuvring of the destroyer-sized cruiser, combined with the Navy's well-established ship-handling skills, saved the day. The result was not what Altmark had intended as. Whilst it did bring the ships together, Cossack escaped serious damage. And the opportunity arose in the tradition of Drake and Nelson for some of the boarding party to leap across the gap between the ships. The first members of the boarding party were soon joined by others, including Cossack's first lieutenant, who forcibly dispossessed the Altmark's captain of his ship. It was an action in which 4 Germans were killed, 5 wounded, and 299 prisoners rescued. Cossack left the fjord, leaving the Altmark aground with her crew. Now, there is a debate, and this is the reason I'm now closing the book on that one, which doesn't go in there, because there are various single perspective accounts, which provide actual details on what may or may not have happened and what may or may not have been signaled. And the trouble is, thanks to, I think, both Norwegian not maintaining the documents for some reason, and Britain not maintaining documents for some reason, everyone having slightly different perspectives, I cannot be exactly sure. But here is the thing as it happens, as I would say it happens, but I couldn't put in the book. They start off with Arethusa outside. She and the 2 I-class destroyers are what managed to find Altmark first. And then the tribals come steaming up. They had been further south, in case she got past. So they were just watching 2 places. Then there is negotiations. The naval officer in charge has some of the Norwegian forces, has some very strict opinions and tries to make a very strong case for what he thinks should happen. And he thinks his view is that the ship Altmark's already been searched. He doesn't seem to realise that the Altmark hadn't been searched, that the captain and the German embassy had kept causing trouble each stage of the way, and each either pretending that they were going to be searched at a later point along the Norwegian coast, or had already been searched. And Norwegians' own internal communications don't seem to be telling each other what's going on. There's also part of me which thinks that the Royal Navy might well have been tipped off about her location by the Norwegian Navy themselves, because they were seriously suspect and seriously annoyed with this ship. But I think they hoped that she would have to go further out to sea instead of hiding in a fjord. And that's what she'd done. She retreated into Jossingford behind the torpedo boats that the Norwegians had sent out. And Vian charges in. He basically announces, look, I'm going to check this ship. If you want to fire on me, you can, but I will fire back and you won't be in the water. He doesn't say those exact words. He just basically says, I'm going in. If you want to be aboard, you can, or you can get out my way. And the inference is clear that you won't be stopping him. As they're going in, it's a very, very tight entrance into Jossingford. An Altmark is a much bigger ship. And they signal they're coming in. They tell Altmark they're coming in to check her. And theoretically, at that point, if Altmark is what she says she is, she shouldn't do anything. She should just put her thing, because they can't take her prisoner. They can't in neutral waters. They know that. They're telling the Outmark they're just coming in to search her to verify her status because they don't trust her claims. The moment Outmark decides to turn on her engines and try to smash Cossack against the wall, she shoots herself in the foot because she actually gets close enough that the grappling hooks fly out and they just fly across. Two chief petty officer and a junior officer fly across, and they look like something out of Jack Sparrow, out of Pirates of the Caribbean. And they're quickly followed by others who do the same. And then once the ropes are in place, they're just pulling themselves up. And at one point, they reckon about 2/3 of Cossack's crew have boarded the Altmark. Now, Vian himself is not supposed to go, and that's why. And it's known that the leader of the boarders is the first officer, the Jimmy. But we also know that there are several people who remark that Vian was aboard the ship and did a personal inspection. So he seems to have... he probably didn't go across in the first wave because he's smart enough to realise he shouldn't do that. But I doubt he was far behind in the second wave. I do know that the person who was in charge of the ship was the navigation officer on the bridge by that point, which would suggest the captain has disappeared off. If the third in command is now in charge, that suggests the captain's disappeared off. But the third in command also manages to get aboard the Altmark at another point, but we'll leave that to one side. Basically, most of the crew managed to seem to get aboard the Altmark at certain points, but there's a debate as to how many and how long they spend. But they get all the prisoners off. The only actual fighting that takes place, there are some pockets of resistance where there's a bit of fighting. Germans aren't really killed on the ship, it seems. The only places where they're killed is when the Germans decide to make a counterattack because they've escaped across the ice to get away, and then they decide they're going to try and counterattack and try and take the ship back. And you sit there and go, there is a freaking destroyer with 4.7-inch guns, that's 120mm guns, sitting the other 8 of them, sitting the other side of that ship, plus 40mm pom-poms, all sorts, and machine guns, all sorts of other things. You really think you guys with rifles are going to take it back off them? And let's not forget, there are sailors now on that ship, and they've got their own rifles, and they've got other things as well they seem to be carrying. There is a debate as to whether some of the officers were wielding swords. There is not a section I did originally want to write in, but I couldn't really get into the debate because the argument, some people say the officers wouldn't have been wielding swords because they're destroyermen, and quite true, the destroyer officers were carrying pistols because that's what they normally carry. They normally carried revolvers or pistols. Quite a lot of destroyer crew tribal seem to have pistols for some reason, despite revolvers technically being the standard issue for officers in the Royal Navy at this time. But you have to again remember those boarding crews, and the boarding crews came from Aurora, a refuser's sister, and they were full of reservists in some respect, but cruiser officers and officers who'd been on cruisers for years. And cruiser officers are far more likely to be carrying and wielding swords. Because let's be honest, for a destroyer officer, a sword is a ceremonial tool which they use occasionally. And it's probably hidden in their offices, and they probably share them. For a cruiser officer, a sword is a major part of their duties because they have to do far more ceremony and diplomacy. And often they do fencing, etc. and things because learning these things is a good way to pass the time when you're on foreign stations. So for them, carrying a sword is a different matter. And we do know some of the crew, some of the personnel in the first wave flying across, were R&R officers from HMS President who were part of that cruiser's crew. And so they might well have their swords out. And that is why the accounts which say we didn't see any of our officers with swords out could be quite correct, because the destroyermen will be referring to their own officers. And if you listen to that phrase, our officers, not the cruiser crew officers who are aboard. So there is latitude in that. But we don't know. We can't be 100% sure. But I'd like to think that they did have swords out, and it was the last proper boarding. But that's the Outmark incident. We'll get into more in Norway, but I'll answer some questions. And report, from memory, Canada gets 2 V-class destroyers post the tribal class destroyers, with the exception of the Afghanistan. How hard would it be to modernise the 1960s for further use? If I remember correctly, the Canadian tribal class destroyers serve, well, Haida serves until 1964, Huron's 1965, Iroquois 66, Micmac Nukta Skainga 64, and Azkaban 69. So they were probably reaching about the end of their service lives at that point, because they've been in service for roughly 20 plus years. And that's pretty much what they kept them for that time. But yeah, if another navy had wanted them for less arduous waters, they could probably have turned them into quite good ships for them. Hello, Michael Pan. Hello, Colin. You should check and see if it's cheaper to buy your computer components over in Canada. Be tempting. Oh. Sean Quigley, wouldn't Corvette to see a Corvette be more appropriate? We might change the car for Halifax. Hakan Vogel, oh, you can never have too much horsepower and charge a good noise. But thinking if they had the Hellcat. I felt the Hellcat might be pushing it a bit much. Andrew, my line of reasoning is that the V-class ships were less capable than tribal class was, so why not keep them in service unless they were completely worn out? Pretty much the trouble is they're worn out. They've been used for career and all sorts of things. Nice agreement. Speaking of tribals, why is the leadership of the class called HMS Afridi, not tribal? Because the tribals are named for the tribals, for the tribes, and Afridi was the first ship of the first tribal name they picked. Good evening, Tyler. I've got a ton of Falca. Hagenberger, seriously, got a new car yet? Not on the 200 horsepower. No, it's another Subaru, another Impreza. This one's red. Oh my gosh, wow, the idea of you doing a guided tour around HMCS Haida would be well worth doing the expensive trip. Well, thank you. That's nice of you to say. Stephen Richards. My wife has just said you are the spitting image of our son and she likes you better than Drac because you're human. I like your wife. Thank you, Stephen. But I like Drac as well. We are seriously spending so much time together these days. I am starting to wonder if we talk so much if we are becoming conjoined, but not that bad yet. I doubt HMS Nelson would have kept her torpedo tubes because there aren't that many reasons to have them. Jonathan, was that with you when you got the charger? No, because that would be something we'd get on the Canada trip, and Drac would be with me for that. So it would be me and Drac in the charger. I was expecting to say you booked a camper van so you could stay dockside for a week. That's not really my style. I like the holiday. John Barrett, was the Polish destroyer Lightning a tribal type? With how it acted, it was definitely very similar. Not quite a tribal type, but it was similar. Stephen Richard, where are you going to put Haida when you bring her back? Me and Drac, of course, would never nick her. Honestly. Ian Carr, who commanded the operation? Presumably Border Office. No, it was actually Captain Vian was in charge of the operation from Cossack. This is the point. The tribals were the tribals, and Vian was the senior captain, so he was in charge of the operation. Arafusa's captain was actually junior to Vian, because Vian had been the inaugural captain of Arafusa. He'd been the one who'd worked her up and checked her out and made sure she worked. So he was a very senior captain. This is something else you have to realize with tribal class destroyers. Their flotilla captains, it's not just their commanders and their ship commanders are elite and elite. They pick out very senior captains. There's a reason why pretty much as soon as Vian leaves the tribal class flotilla, he becomes a rear admiral. It's a very quick, and he's sent off to check the routes to Norway, to check the routes to Russia, etc., and various other things. So you have to remember when you're dealing with the tribal class flotillas and their destroyer flotillas, those captains of those flotillas are very senior officers. In fact, there's one document which suggested to me that the whole point was that the tribal class flotilla's captain would be the deputy to the rear admiral destroyers. So they would be senior. And this is certainly the case in this one. Vian's in charge. Ryan Cash, it's hard for me not to view this as one-eyed way of British shit to justify glory. How was it viewed internationally? A lot of tongue-in-cheek. Because there are a lot of people... basically, if the British had not found the 300 prisoners aboard the Outmark, it would have been massively the British are being evil and bad. But because they got the 300 prisoners, all the German howls of British piracy, everyone was sort of looking at it. But you'd broken the law, and Norway was stuck in a tough place and couldn't reinforce it because you were basically threatening war if they actually carried out their duties. So, yeah, the British did break the law, but you'd kind of broken it first. No worries, Stafford. Portugal, so the RN is looking for souvenirs. They were definitely looking for something. There were a lot of souvenirs which came back. Anyway, it would have been funny if the crew of the Outmark cannonballed and got the Cossack. It would have been funny. Unlikely, but funny. Hello, Alistair Shaw. There's asking, Cossack's fourth in command. Where have our men gone? All of them gone. I'm fairly sure the ship's cap did make it. Run Cash, I hope you're well. Yeah. Oh, it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. Johnson, the RN should reinstate Stormship as a requirement for service. As you mentioned, a long war, ammo will run slow, so boarding may become fashionable again. To be honest, hanging around the number of RNRs I have, bayonet drill and swordmanship are still very much part of it. Nordwolf, was the Cossack legally in the wrong by going and checking? Yes, because she'd been told specifically not to. Shrike 16, was single stick training still coming in this era of the RN? It was for midshipmen. Dr. Clarke, Drac Hyder and Dodge Charger rocking the nation of Canada. It'll be fun. Stafford, that sounds nice on the tooth out. Derek Rossi, no, the Cossacks crew was switching ownership of the sword mid-battle line in the scene from Pirates of the Caribbean 2. Potentially. Those got impressive should be blue. Now I've colored as acceptable. My previous one was blue. This one's red, which is cute. He used to drawing Drac for one of his live QAs. That would be fun. Why does Ron? It's a nice character. So why does Romney not have her torpedo tubes removed? Honestly, because they never get round to it. And how do I fix Rodney's problems? Ooh. I'd like to give her more power. Dan and coming back from Canada trip. Look at this fantastic 1-to-1 scale model we got. He's right. I believe Captain Vian was by now captain by rank, not just by. Vian had been captain by rank for a while by this point. Senator Steve Richards, is it the Sackville a working museum ship? If so, a one-way ticket should do. That she is a working museum ship. How likely is that none of Incomparable's crew would survive if she suffered the fate that befell Hood? And how likely is Incomparable would suffer the same neglect that Hood was the victim of? That's a lot of variables you're introducing, that to K1. That's a lot of variables. It's a lot of variables. And also, there is the fact there's the Incomparable as theorized by Jackie Fisher, and as the Incomparable as it would have actually been built by the Royal Navy. And those can be very different things. Because, yes, they might take the 20-inch guns, they might have the same idea of speed, etc., but I wouldn't be surprised if the Incomparable as built by the Royal Navy had geared steam turbines rather than diesel engines, had probably a lot more armour, and was probably slightly differently designed. Because for the whilst Jackie Fisher might consider it sensible to build a ship that will not be of any use in after 10 years, the Royal Navy would prefer to have a ship which was still useful for 20 years. Captain Seafront. Did the Captain's D tend to be very senior, or were the tribal flotillas unusual in that respect? It depends on the flotilla you're talking about. Tribal's always senior. Some of the other flotillas, sometimes more junior, sometimes more senior. Sometimes it'd be their first time as a Captain D. Sometimes it'd be their second time as a Captain D. Tribal flotillas, it was often their second flotilla of destroyers. So they'd already commanded a cruiser. They commanded destroyers for years before that. Then they commanded one flotilla of destroyers. And then after that, they got promoted to run a tribal flotilla. So basically it goes destroyer. I've commanded 3 destroyers. Then I've commanded a cruiser. Then I've commanded 1 destroyer flotilla. Then I get my tribal flotilla. Hello, Shumi. Azaski, nope. Groms were built in J. Samuel White in Crows. No trolls were built there. Also, they were built for the Baltic and the stability problems in the North Sea and Atlantic. They had their funnels that cut short, boat racks, and heavy spotlights removed after reaching UK to ease that. They're also thinking about removing 1 gun or rebuilding the bridge. Runcash, have you hired a roof rack or a trailer for the Charger to carry the brew supplies? We will need to talk with, me and Drac will need to work that one out. If we, as I said, the plan changes and depends, and I won't know whether the very nice people who have started off this idea and have said they'd like to, as I said, organise this and pay for some things. I will learn about that, their final things, whether they can do that in February. And if they do, great. If they don't, then I'm organising it myself, and I'll contact the local university, as said, and see if they would like. If I could be of help to them, if they have a similar program that King's has, and if they'd like me to take part in that, and because King's of course does the Lawton series of lectures, which I love the Naval History series lectures that they do there, and if the local university has a history department does that, and they would like me, I'd be happy to go and give a talk. And sort of, I'll sort all those things out myself. And even if the other people are very kindly are paying for it, if they have factor in, let's put it this way, if they factor in free time, then I'll do that anyway as well, because I consider that good manners. If you're a visiting academic, if you're on a work trip, I'm probably going to be using one of the archives I want to go look in is actually the university's archives. So, So, Sherburn Conservatory, will the Charger have a painted F-75 on the side? Probably not, because I'm fairly certain it'll be whatever I can get from the lovely people at the rental agency. Hello, Michelle. Fantastic. Canadians, when seeing Dr. C and Drac, quick, hide the snow on the museum chips. We're being invaded and pillaged. Well, not quite that bad. Probably. Sean Mack, hello. Hello, Jack Ray. Hello, that's good. The Royal Router. What would have happened if Norway had resisted the British task force violently? Assuming Norwegians take heavy losses, would they have voluntarily joined the Axis? Could have done. But there again, if they'd resisted the British violently, and then the British had found the prisoners in there, the British might have taken the Norwegian ports and probably done it before the Germans could respond, because remember the Germans take till I'll start building up now, but take till April to get ready. The British could have got ready a lot quicker. But also, it would have looked very bad on the Norwegian faces if they'd resisted after claiming they'd searched the ship, and then the British had broken the resistance, fought them down, and then found the prisoners aboard. It would have made the Norwegians... Because you must remember, the Norwegian government was in a bind as to which to support, but the Norwegian public was mostly pro-British and pro-Allied. They didn't like the Germans, for similar reasons that Denmark didn't. So that could have caused an entirely different scenario. It could have caused Norway to get... Well, they could have ended up going for very heavily armed neutrality. It could have been they could end up having to, for peace, give concessions to the British, which would include certain ports to become British, i.e. the British would probably occupy Narvik. They probably demand Narvik, which would be a very interesting scenario, because then Germany wouldn't want them to do it, but let's put it this way, it would be complicated enough that the world would be very interesting to see for a few days. But the Norwegians were never going to resist the British. Vian was gambling on that, but Vian also read the tea leaves quite well on that subject. That's awesome. You never expect naval history inquisition. Samsung, are you going all-wheel drive V6 or rear-wheel drive V8? I'm going for the one which the rental company has. I looked at it. I think it might be the all-wheel drive V6. I think it might be, but there is an option for a bit extra on it, which might well be our rear-wheel drive V8. But there again, there's part of me which goes, June in Canada, that should be okay weather-wise. So the rear-wheel drive, I wouldn't feel stupid having rear-wheel drive. But if I was going, I have to admit, if I was going in December, November time, or January right now, I would go for the all-wheel drive, because I just go, that would be stupid. In the nicest way, driving on snow in rear-wheel drive versus all-wheel drive. I would be sitting there going, yes, I have a lot of power, I can't get it down. I might as well have the V6, I'll beat more people. Not that I'd ever break speeding laws. My turn. Is it fair to call the failure to properly maintain Hood anything other than willful neglect? That is not how you treat a flagship of the most powerful navy in the world. It's fair to say that the governments were very short-sighted. Cash. So you can call me a conspiracy theorist, but how come Drac has trained Dr. Clarke in sword and naval close combat with skills before their so-called peaceful visit to Haida? I love Drac, but he didn't need to train me in those. I came pre-trained. Don't take this the wrong way, but from a young age at school, I did fencing, I did rugby, and I was a scholarship boy at a private school. So, in the nicest way, you get this accent, but you also get the ability to deal with, let's say, this people in various ways. Oh, and I also did boxing, a bit of karate, a bit of jujitsu, a bit of taekwondo, and have done a few other martial arts in my time. Plus, spent a lot of time in my life with the Royal Marines. A lot of time with Royal Marines. I've even survived going out drinking and that on pub crawls with Royal Marines. Oh. And I might be sober, but the trouble is, well, I can be wacky enough while still sober. Jameth, Captain Ian would have been a post-captain by the old Markinson prior to gaining his flag. They didn't have the Commodore level in that sort of period, so yeah. Commodore was an appointment at that time rather than a rank, so it was a senior captain. Andrew, can one consider Belshakir to be an honorary tribal? There is certainly an argument to be made for the J, K, and ships and the other vessels which come off them. And Paul, Janovis does share the second place for battle honours and 13, sharing with Orion and Nubian, and one step above Tartar, and the Grand Old Lady at 14, plus one for Jutland. Yeah, I know, but I disagree with that because, as I point out in my book, if you counted destroyer actions like you counted battleship battles, destroyers would win them hands down. But destroyers get campaign awards. Battleships turn up and fire their guns. It's a battle. I've seen a fair few pictured tribals with black stain on their sides, typically from memory, just after the bridge and around the funnel. Is that fuel oil, the area where fuel oil was taken board, or if not, what else? Pretty much you are on it with the fuel oil where it's taken on board, but it's also where sometimes they had sort of gash areas. Come from. Have you reminded Drac that iron brew is both legal and available in Canada, but both of these things are not true when doing his USA trip? Hmm. Sure. Out of the JK, JNK, or Ls, what is your preferred destroyer class? Ooh, I like the Ls. I have a soft spot for the Ls. Mainly because whilst the L40s are built, the L70s would have been gorgeous. And they would have been the super tribals. What happens if the British or even Norwegians discover Quisling's meetings with the German commanders in December 1939 prior to the events of April 1940? Then probably there is a rapid mobilization in the British terms. My quote example for Quisling is that when he walked into the head of police in Oslo's office and demands that he arrest the government, the first question the head of police asks is, "Who are you?" The second question is, "How did you get in here?" And the third question is, "Get out my freaking office." It's not so much a question. Honestly, the Quisling came very close to being shot by the Norwegian police long before the Germans were in any position to protect him. Senator, in Hearts of Iron 4, there is a glitch that makes it possible to build a battleship from keel laying to commissioning in a week. What if, for example, Ireland managed to do that in real life by 1938? Ouch! If Ireland did that and had a battleship in a week, there'd be a long question about who that battleship belonged to. Asako 18. Hello, let's say it this way. Norwegian politicians right before the Second World War were very good at sitting on their hands. They even mobilized by mail when the German invaded April. Yeah, I've discovered this in Norway AT videos. Oh, they're just fun. Andrew Jones, in Fisher's 95 battleship designs, X4 10 guns and 11-inch armor are 25 knots. He had 2 twin turrets and 3 triples and echelon turrets. Would this be a new example of the triple turret? Would this be a new early example of the triple turret search? It is something I have heard about and I am looking into. The best part of that video of you and Drac is looking at your face the whole time was like a little kid playing with his friend that can take it. It was quite fun, that video of sword fighting. We are planning more of those. Van Freeman, spending time with a lot of Royal Marines tends to mean a lot of naked time, doesn't it? I sometimes think they're allergic to clothing. Okay, you just accept it. You just accept it. Jeff Harwood was a Commodore at the River Plate, not a captain, riveted, I believe. Was just used in general service. Harwood was Commodore of the South Atlantic. That he was a breveted captain, but it was a post Commodore of South Atlantic Division, South American Division. It's kind of like Michael Clapp in 1982. He was Commodore Amphibious Task Group. He wasn't a Commodore in rank. That was his title of this role. So he was treated as a Commodore. Commodore was not made a constituted rank in the Royal Navy until the 1990s. Under report, at this point we realised that good Cotto would have been right at home had he been on Cossack during the Outmark incident. The nicest way, there would have been 3 first boarders. Runcash, Dr. Clarke, my technically minded wife asks if you have a GoPro to take to Canada. No, I don't have a GoPro to take to Canada. At the moment, I'm still working out what we'd be taking with us and what Drac will be taking with him because he has a humongous camera selection. But we'll sort all that out. Just asking, is it just me or does the word Marine in almost every country lead to the same type of person? Yes! Marine or Naval Infantry, they're all pretty much the same. The ships can generate smoke to hide behind via chemical reactions. These vessels are called smoke pots. One way to make a smoke bank. Yeah, there are several systems. You can either dump fuel into the burners to create a certain amount of smoke and send it up this funnel. And you have a smoke generating system that does something similar and has its own tubing rather than going out of the funnel. Or you have smoke pots, which are these containers, dustbin sized, really. Put them on the side. They can be set off with either an electrical charge, the later ones, but some of them are literally and you have a smoke bank for a few minutes. The Shrike 16. Super Tribals, a scary prospect for the Axis, it is. Yes, basically, if you want to have an idea what a Super Tribal L-class, L-70 would have looked like, have a look at the Daring-class destroyers from the 1950s. And just imagine that coming out in it would have been built the same design. It would have been the designs directly after the Tribals. So the Tribals entered service in 38, 39. These L-70s would have entered service in 40 and probably 39 and 40. Maybe 41. But yeah, they would have been big and scary and powerful. So, Thompson, would you agree that the actual progression for these space races via Virgin, Amazon, and SpaceX is a space race, arms race to secure the resources to keep growing their companies? Uh, I wouldn't be surprised if there is something going on. It's basically getting to space is only an advantage once you can start mining in space. And that's what the first thing you should think about is mining, exploiting space resources. The trick is once you can get up there and down, that's then starts making mining more and more viable. And let's be honest, if you have able to colonize Mars, that's wonderful. But once you can colonize Mars and you can start getting colonies on the moon, etc., and maybe on the moons of Mars, then that makes mining of asteroids far more practical. Simon Thompson, just listen to Gain in part 1 of Jutland by Drachenfeld and cast dozens. Question. Okay. Would the ground fleet have been better off at Jutland if HMS Lion had blown up with BT when Q turret was destroyed? I wouldn't like to lose HMS Lion, but if when Q turret was destroyed, some magical piece of shrapnel managed to go up and knock him out, that wouldn't be a bad thing. That's right. Just don't get roped into reenacting historical naval cuisine with Drac. No. Well, I believe my previous comment went in the wrong context due to it following the Thomas comment. I mean, Clarke would be at home in respect to his abilities. Fencing. Yeah. Cash, my father was working as a doctor in a hospital in Norway when the Marines had been on Arctic practice. They went out drinking, and a few of them ended up sleeping with their feet outside the tent. Bad. Yeah. That is bad. And Americans, I have one question regarding what if the war goes well for the British. Can I ask if it now would rather me wait till the end near the end? There is no wrong answer. I'll take it now. I haven't yet got onto the part of the next one. I've got 3 good stories to go through in here from Norway and start off with. In Stranding, Commodore is a bit of an awkward rank. What's explained to me is a Commodore is a captain of captains, used to designate the Holt's position in command structure, irrespective of seniority. Pretty much. Come, when's the Castle Tour of Wales? I'm planning on that one. If I get to go to Canada, then Newcastle has to come before Wales. Because I have to go to the archives in Newcastle, because that's where, of course, Haida was built. And then the plan after Canada would, of course, the dream would be to do Australia and see HMS Vampire. But the reality is that I probably will get Norway first. And Norway, I would hope to get to. My ideal time for getting to Norway would be. Well, there's part of me which would like to go about now, about December, April time, so I could see it like it would be for during the Altmark incident. But there's part of me which would like to go in April next year and see it at that sort of time. Not this year because I can't. There's no way. I would need a lot of money coming in. I would need the book sales would have to go through the roof and be absolutely supreme for me to do Norway and Canada in the same year. But if I can do Norway in April next year, that would be lovely. That would be a dream come true to go and see it and have a look around it and basically see the fjords. And I've got a friend already who's said he'll give me a guided tour on his boats. He's a naval historian in Norway. And he said he'll help with that, which would be very kind of him. So again, who would have bought a battleship from Ireland after they built like 20 or 30 in 38? Probably Britain would have bought the battleships. Brent Paulus, has any navy used Commodore as the highest rank besides the early US? Oh, a few have tried. Basically, smaller nations navies have often used Commodore. Some have used Captain as the highest rank. Hello, Desert Foxo. Hello, Dark Squad. Yes, Carl. My Americans. Rewatched Warlords the other day and have one question. If the Butterflies had started line and Glorious and Courageous survived, Seabeam battle construction was not halted. Norway is won. Taranto is even more successful. Malaya doesn't fall. And North Africa either doesn't happen or is more easily won by Allies. Deep in Halley. What effect might that have on Church and Stalin's relationship and in turn the history of Eastern Europe? I fully realise that might be a bit of an ambitious question, but would a free Allied control Norway mean, for say, the Warsaw Uprising? Could plans have been make the proposed supply drops without refueling the Soviet-held territory? Yes. Well, let's be honest. If you have an allied Norway and you have an allied Crete, then you can take out the German oil fields in southeastern Europe without any trouble, and you can beat up most of German industry without any trouble from Norway. You basically turn Germany. You've got the bombing campaigns to keep crushing them. The interesting question is whether or not you would have under that scenario, if the North Africa campaign is won, and let's say it's won in when they first do the first campaign, because the Tarantos happen, the Italian Navy can't interfere in Crete. They can't. They get beaten up in Greece. They probably still win in Greece, but they get beaten up more in Greece, and therefore they can't send the troops, and they don't have the ships to send supplies to North Africa. So the British win the logistics war that is North Africa, and manage to keep the supplies going by sea to keep the troops going forward, and so they win the North Africa campaign. If that happens before you have the fall of Malaya, before you have 1941, probably then in 1941 you'll have troops move to support Malaya. But you'll also have the bombing campaigns progressing from Norway, the bombing campaigns progressing from Crete, and it's a scenario where you have a far larger, far more capable Royal Navy to reinforce the Indian Ocean, to devote resources to the Indian Ocean. They don't need many resources for a holding action in the Mediterranean because they can run convoys, fast convoys if they need to, between the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean along the southern shore of the Mediterranean, and air cover and escorted by destroyers, etc., the whole way along. If you've restricted access oil supplies and you've got bombing at our factories, you're going to cause trouble for them. If Glorious and Courageous have survived, then probably Shanos and Gneisenau might not have survived in that scenario, because the scenario where Gneisenau and Shanos don't survive, they of course managed to get the aircraft carrier. So if they don't, so they probably not survived. In which case, you have a far stronger fleet to deal with in the Far East and deter the Japanese, which could make the Japanese think long and hard before they start the war with the Americans, because there's already a strong British fleet, so they already have two large fleets to deal with, and they've got to work out which one to go for first. And when the Warsaw Uprising happens, well, if you're able to get supplies, if you've already got into the Baltic, and that's the thing, if you've got into the Baltic and you've able to cut off the Baltic supplies to Germany or from Sweden, and cut off all the Baltic supply routes because of your access granted to you by Norway, then the German economy probably collapses by about 1941. So you might have a very different World War II ending in terms of Europe. I have a feeling World War II versus Japan would still probably be quite a bitter war, but the war in Europe could well be different. Go on, Karen. My grandfather was Royal Marines, and out of the odd things, and the odd things they had, one of the shocked was that he never milked sheep to proper tea when in the Highlands. Oh yes. Strong agree. Not only damn smart. Hmm. True. Sometimes, at some point, I will visit USS Alabama again. Just see if you want anything from her, let me know. Ooh, that's always good. I like Alabama. Carmen, I'm planning to see Belfast this year. Going to cost me £200 to spend one day travelling there and one day there. That doesn't surprise me. It's not cheap. But if you're going to see Belfast, give me and Rack a heads up. Sim Richards, well, she who must be obeyed said I can't go with you and Drac to Canada. Cruel. That is the other thing. If it is completely me and Drac organising ourselves, and I'll probably put some of the dates out there on Discord and just go if people want them, if they want to come with us and see us, they're more than welcome to. It'll be something fun. Not a wolf. I think some location stuff should be excellent. Like Woody from World War II TV says, nothing beats on location for really understanding. No, it doesn't. But yeah, Norway would be fun. Hmm. Thank you, Stafford. What stopped people in the Admiralty getting fired for their failure to heed warnings that Hood was sending out? Resulting in nearly all hands lost when she was sunk. Ugh. There was a war on. They didn't have the people to spare. Carmen, what happens if Germany holds Crete and Spain and Britain holds Gibraltar and Norway? If Germany manages to get Crete and Spain, well, they're fighting a guerrilla war in Spain, which, as Napoleon would tell you, is not good, because if you've invaded Spain, because I doubt Franco would actually declare war on your side. It's also then probably fighting a war versus Portugal, which again is mountainous terrain, which is not really good for the Germans. Depend on certain things, and their logistics is not always that great, as we've been over before. Spain is not a good place for their logistics, as they would tell you after experience with the Condor Legion. And the Spanish-Portuguese border is definitely not a good place for their logistics. So they'd be having a nightmare in a quagmire. So there goes your invasion of the Soviet Union. The British would be having fun because their carriers could basically go all around Spain attacking German targets whenever they felt like it. Gibraltar, to secure it, the British would have to move inland. The only way they could really secure Gibraltar properly, they would have to use the guns on Gibraltar, of course, as part of their security of it. But they would probably have to, with help of the partisans, secure the first sort of coastline area and a few miles inland, so they can build some proper air bases, etc. With Norway, Germany's got a lot of trouble. Norway's a big problem for them. Mm-hmm. Hmm. Janus, I agree Commodore is Robin, but Howard was a ranking Commodore. No, he was in the post of a Commodore. Again, not a ranking Commodore. He was in the post of Commodore. Commodore South America Squadron. South America Division. It's a role. It's a rank, a duty, but it's not a. It's not. He's not a Commodore. He's addressed as Commodore, and he wears the uniform of Commodore, but he's a captain. Is his substantive rank. So it's an appointed rank, but not a substantive rank, if that makes sense. Substantive ranks are captain and rear admiral at this point. Commodore is an appointed rank. If he retired, he wouldn't be called Commodore after his retirement. He'd be captain. This is Fox. If Fisher had got something similar to his battlecruiser year, and R-class dreaders have been built as battlecruisers like the original renowned patrols, what effects on treaties and refits? Do the Quees get a refit? Oh, yeah, they all get a refit. Possibly more of the R-class get a refit. That's a shot. Out of successful admirals of World War II, who would you like to be long-term remembered like Nelson, Hood, and Collingwood? Vian and Cunningham, and to an extent Somerville. Mm-hmm. Oh gosh, there was a plan while. Unfortunately, Run, that is not currently being not likely to go ahead for various things, thanks to mainly the virus of mystery origins. Sure, Mike, the British even had a Sierra lines of terrace at Gibraltar, so the Germans will have to concentrate to keep the British there so they can't disperse to deal with the guerrillas. It's been fun. Hi, Franco. So let's go to the next one. The next part of the Norway story. Norway, Gurkha. Gurkha was named to fight, and as a tribal class destroyer, she was built to do so. And in a concentrated German air attack off Norway on 9th of April, let me just highlight so I don't lose. Under sustained tactical bombing, she fought to the death. The 6th of her class commission, she was the first to be sunk. 1940 had started well for Gurkha. Together with Nubian, she had been repeatedly engaged in hunting U-boats without loss, but without any confirmed sinkings. However, she was eventually found successful. She was eventually found success when partnered with Le Fantastique, the lead ship of the French Le Fantastique destroyer class, sinking U-53 on the 21st of February. Less than 7 weeks later, whilst escorting the home fleet in tempestuous weather, she would meet her fate. At 1400 hours on 9th of April, the force came under attack by German Junker Ju-88 and HE-111 bombers. The weather had made AA defense difficult, so Gurkha made the courageous decision move to alter course in order to bring her guns to bear on the attacking aircraft. However, the new course took her away from the rest of the screen. Easily singled out, she came under concentrated attack and was hit by a single bomb. The bomb struck home aft, ripping a 40-foot wide hole in the starboard side, causing the aft magazine to flood and fire to break out. This led to a 45-degree list to starboard, and the stern became awash. At 1900 hours, she sank, firing into the sky almost to the very end, and it was fortunate she did so, because Aurora, the Arethusa-class light cruiser, alerted by the firing of high explosive shells, arrived to rescue a crew, of which 190 survived. At the beginning war, such a response to an air attack was not unusual. There had been continual debate, which to some extent still exists today, about how individual ships and groups of ships should best respond to air attack. The idea behind the aggressive response was that by moving into the most advantageous position for their guns to bear on targets, for example, with a surface combatant fight, they would have the greatest chance of shooting down enemy aircraft. Such maneuvering was clearly predicated on the belief that the most effective method for stopping an enemy air attack was to destroy the aircraft. But it inevitably splits up a task force, and ships can find themselves beyond the range from which they can provide mutual support. The alternative was for ships to stay in together, presenting a joint wall of fire which sought to drive enemy aircraft away as much as destroy them. This was the more defensive approach and became standard thinking, but the experience of Gurkha and other ships lost filtered into the debate. Gurkha's loss was the subject of discussion, and responsibility for her loss sought. In his autobiography, the then Admiral Philip Vian, who had commanded, wrote, "One destroyer flotilla, Gurkha, was commanded by a noted gunnery officer, Commander Sir Anthony Badazod. After years of training, presented at last with live targets, he was excessively annoyed by his inability to hit them, and turned his ship away from the wind and sea to better the conditions for the control and fire of guns. This involved leading the cruiser screen, and I should have recalled them at once, but in those very early days of air attacks on ships, the tactics to be pursued by surface forces was still being worked out, and there was no set policy. Buzzard's manoeuvre cost him his ship, and very nearly the lives of his crew. For an officer whose writing and service suggests candor, this was an unusually equivocal summing up. Perhaps the reason is that until the Second World War, no one really knew, despite the many exercises and the quantity of ink expended upon it, what an air attack would be like. Just as with every previous war officers, officers were quickly learning that the theory and the exercises and the training they had all completed were only based on the best possible assumptions at the time. In war, as opposed to naval exercises, the wrong decision could lead to much graver consequences. It's worth noting that in the immediate aftermath, Rear Admiral destroyers Ronald Hamilton Curzon Halifax, that's a great name, isn't it, who had overall authority over destroyers on the home fleet at the time, wrote, Captain D4, that's Captain Destroyer Flotilla 4, or Tribal Flotilla 1, that's Philip Vian, in paragraph 1 of minute 2, has generously accepted responsibility for allowing Gurkha to become detached but his minute was written on the 22nd of April, which time all or most of us had realised that to remain concentrated was the best defence against air attack, whereas on the 9th of April, when the attack took place, this was not generally realised. It shows the progression of learning, 13 days. Hello, Brandon Larson, thank you, from Seattle. When the attack took place, this was not generally realised. Destroyers escorting Norwegian convoys when under an air attack had often been out of supporting distance from each other, and no harm had come to them. I knew this and had issued no instructions on the matter. I do not, therefore, consider the Captain Destroyer D4 is any more to blame than I am, except for the omission to notice that the Gurkha had detached herself completely, as opposed to taking independent avoiding action. In his own report, Commander Buzzard cited the maximum angle of elevation of the 4.7-inch guns as the reason for this manoeuvre. 4-inch guns with a far higher angle of elevation would replace X-mount later in the war. However, he also claimed he was targeting a 4-engine bomber-type aircraft, something which is disputed, as the only German aircraft of that type, the Fokker FW-200 Condor, did not arrive in Norway for another week. Buzzard's decision made at the time was, thanks to this and other experiences, not something that would be repeated. Vian recalled in his memoirs that, returning from this meeting, I observed to Captain Mountbatten how I viewed the Admiral's opinions about bombing and with foreboding. It amounted, if hit, to losing one's reputation in addition to one's ship and possibly life. This was after the previously mentioned Rear Admiral destroyers, Halifax, following his experience of the air attacks which resulted in loss of Gurkha, insisted that whether a ship was hit by a bomb or not depended upon the actions of the captain. This did not sit well with either Mountbatten or Vian, both of whom seemed to grasp early on that it was an educated guess which way to dodge when the bombs dropped, and no one's honour should hang on the whim of fate of such a guess. When discussing Norway and destroyers, however, there is one place which almost always demands most attention: Narvik. There were 3 battles. In one, the Norwegians were overwhelmed. Another ended in a draw, with the Navy losing good ships. And one ended in annihilation of the enemy, with the Kriegsmarine beaching destroyers so that their crews might escape. The tribals were involved in the third, but as the Navy only count the last 2, it has become the second Battle of Narvik. Now, I'll get into that in a bit. the Royal Navy didn't really have Commodore First Class or Second Class. The only times they really had Commodores First and Second Class were back in a period of time when they decided all their admirals were idiots and they didn't want to put any of them in charge of the fleet, so they had a Commodore in charge of the fleet, and of course he couldn't be in charge of all the squadrons at the same time, so they had to have assistants at Commodores to command them, and that's back with in the era of Blake. I think Blake was the Commodore in the case. Roughly about 190, 200. Hello, Paul Thompson. Caught another live. Hello. 19 predictions. In the event of stalemate in Norway, Germans have the southern half, the British the northern half. What kind of war would that turn into? Hide and dash raids? Could one force even mount operations to oust the other force? Norway, once you're away from the ports and harbors, honestly strikes me as an all-round military nightmare for attacking forces once events are established. Pretty much, it would become a quagmire away from the coast. It would certainly damage the Germans' ability to get involved in any Arctic operations, because with control of any strong section of Norway, especially if they take from Narvik above, the maritime patrol for anti-submarine and anti-surface radar operations becomes so much easier because your aircraft, they just have to fly and then refuel and come back. And they can rearm on both sides, and they can refuel on both sides, and it suddenly makes life a lot easier for your crews and your aircraft and your patrols. Andrew Paul, off topic. Interesting, I found the Against All Odds universe earlier today, which is based on the game Hearts of Iron 2. In that universe, a modernized HMS Hood faced Bismarck in the Battle of Kazan in June 1941. Battle ends in Bismarck exploding from a shell hit through a heavy shell deck. I was later fighting some battles on Atlantic Fleet, Denmark straight night attack on Bismarck scenario. In the former, Bismarck was sunk by a shot to a magazine, courtesy of Hood, and the latter, a torpedo salvo from Cossack and Zulu with some assistance from Maori caused a magazine explosion on Bismarck. And that's not historical, but it did seem a very strange coincidence. It's one of the interesting scenarios, because that's the big what if. The problem with the destroyers that Hood and Prince of Wales had with them were the slightly smaller destroyers, because the tribals were off doing other duties. But usually, the tribals had gone with Hood and had looked after Hood when she was in those sort of waters. So this is one of the reasons why Vian and his crews feel quite so motivated when they hear that Hood's been lost. Because they think if they'd been there, she wouldn't have been lost. It's rather like the Battle of Narvik. They feel that if they'd been there, the second Battle of Narvik would not have happened that way. There wouldn't have been any losses. The German squadron would have been wiped out, and there would have been no losses of these. There might have been a single tribal might have been gone, but the Germans would have been annihilated. There would have never been any chance, because that was the tribal's job, and their job, they didn't view that as. It's going to sound strange. It sounds almost rude when you say it like that, but their view was that those destroyers were built to attack with their torpedoes and the other fleet destroyers, and the thing was the tribals were built to protect them. And the tribals are built to do the fighting so the other destroyers can get close. So their view is that there should have been 4 tribal-class destroyers with the first group going in. Probably there would have also been, if Vian had been around, he would probably try to get an Arethusa-class cruiser for tribals and as many of those as the H-class flotilla as possible into a strike group to go in. But that wasn't done because they weren't sure where the Germans were, so they sent those other ships. But let's be honest, Narvik should have been a pretty high priority bet because that's an important port. And it goes back to Bismarck. If the tribals had been with Hood and Prince of Wales, they could have kept up better than the other destroyers did in the rough weather, because they're slightly bigger, they're slightly tougher, and they're designed for it. And this is one of the reasons why you get tribalitis during the war. People sort of go, this shows bad problems with tribals, and actually it's because they are constantly being used in rough weather at high speed because they can do that, whereas other destroyers can't. And this means their engines get worn more, which means they develop tribalitis and need to get the engines reconditioned, repaired, and replaced because they get more damage. It's a simple confluence of events. And this is what happens. This is what you do. You have these scenarios and you deal with it. So if they'd been there, the odds are Bismarck would have been dealing with a torpedo attack whilst also trying to fire at Hood. And that would have affected her firing. Because there's one thing, if you're in an engagement where you're going, we've got this enemy, we're dealing with this type of threat, so we're going to blast away at each other. But if you've got also a torpedo attack, and again, that would change things, because if you've got a torpedo attack coming in, then the cruisers that are standing off probably also come in as well. And the reason they come in is because they concentrate their fire on Prince Jürgen, so the destroyers would have cover, because they would be coming from multiple sides. Because the destroyers wouldn't attack from one side. The destroyers would immediately split up, and honestly, if Bismarck is lucky, they attack from three sides. If you have someone like Wien there and is in charge and has 4 or 5 destroyers with him, including, let's say, Purin, let's say it's the force he has escorting a convoy, then the odds are the Germans are dealing with a destroyer coming in at them, launching torpedoes from 5 points of the compass. So they've got 5 spreads of torpedoes aimed for Bismarck coming at her. So if she dodges, it doesn't matter really which way she dodges. She's probably going to get at least hit by 1 or 2 salvos, which means she's probably going to get hit by, let's say, from the 5 torpedoes in each salvo, 2 or 3. In which case she gets 4 or 5 torpedo hits from the 25 odd torpedoes that are launched at her in that salvo. And that's unless they are going back and do refills, which is probably going to be good by Vienna for Bismarck. Because even if those don't sink her, the damage they do will slow her down enough that Hood and Prince of Wales will sink her. And the heavy cruisers getting in. So this is the trouble. What you have for the Germans is pretty much a Denmark Straits, the best scenario they could have, in that they end up with a capital ship engagement. If you'd have the destroyers there, you'd have basically an all-arms attack, and that would have caused enough trouble for the Germans that they would have been in problems. That's good. I remember a memoir from an Arctic convoy Commodore, RN Commodore, first action against the alongside the USN. Aircraft appear, an RN destroyer group group up for mass air defense. The USN destroyers instead charges. Yeah. Towards the aircraft before turning broadside, unleashing every gun on board. German bombers, seeing the air in front of them exploding, decided discretion better than valor. To be honest, it was probably both the USN's DD and the RN's DD destroyers firepower. And the two combined would certainly be interesting for them to deal with. And by the way, I should probably announce, well, I remember, the suggestions is live for February. So if you're a patron and you want to suggest topics for February, the suggestion box is live. Captain Seagull, was there any fixed wing non-Zeppelin air attack on ships at sea during World War I? And what World War II air defense lessons were learned from World War I? Zeppelin or fixed wing? Not many. There were a few, but not many. And so that's why that's one of the reasons why there weren't that many lessons learned. There were a few attacks, but they're mostly individual aircraft, and there is a difference between being attacked by 1 or 2 aircraft versus 30 or 40 aircraft. Andrew Hall, re your point about the tribals normally escorting Hood. From a Sea King perspective, could the tribals have kept double Hood and Prince Wales in heavy seas as opposed to I-class? Much better than the I-class. because they were bigger and heavier, and that's one of the points. The construction of the tribals is far stronger than other class of destroyers because they are fighting destroyers. They're built to take and sustain damage in that sort of way, and that affects the way they're structured internally. Sure. I like the story relay of the tribals coming off a convoy and reforming on Renown in 2 hours. They did a few fun things. June 1915. Imperial German fleet now has all in the ports of Norway, Holland, Denmark, and France. Can UK, US, and Russia stop the Kaiser? It's going to be a long war, but yes. Yeah, because you basically are waking up 2 sleeping giants and you haven't got the bombing campaigns. So if you think about it, the ports of Liverpool, Camel Aids, all the ports which are on the Irish coast and the Irish Sea, they're safe from German attack. And Germany's managed to get Norway. Well, if they've managed to take Norway, Holland, and Denmark without getting hurt, they've been very lucky. If they've got France and Belgium, and probably France and Belgium, which probably will have if they got France, then they are in the middle of fighting guerrilla war. And it's not the aircraft aren't there that they were planning on. You possibly will see an expansion in aircraft production, in aircraft development. But it'll probably be a longer war, but yeah. Be quite a painful war for the Kaiser long term. Short term, it looked glorious. Which tribe of the class destroyers were often with Hood? Usually it was 4th DF, 4th Destroyer Flotilla. Occasionally 6th, i.e. the 1st and 2nd tribal flotillas as they were called. When they originally built. That's good. According to the memoir, the RNDDs didn't fire. The Commodore signaled the US and DD. Something along the lines of very impressive, but standing orders to form up on me. Yeah. I'm sorry. The standing RN orders were to form up and start firing with every gun they've got. The DD, the American DD has just done a very impressive version of Gurkha. I'm fairly certain it the wall of fire, as impressive as it would have been, it probably involves some British firepower coming in behind it as well. I was asking, how and by whom were the underwater torpedo tubes aimed on battleships? They had them. Also, did the torpedoes have to go straight from the tube or had some kind of mechanism in this direction? They would come straight out the tube, but they had guidance to an extent built in that they could command, they could program into them, and that's how they worked it. They had a whole torpedo officer team and a torpedo aiming and command and control team as part of their torpedo crew. The tribals are cruisers in seakeeping too. They are closer to cruisers than destroyers in seakeeping. That's good. If memory counts, Jeremy Clarke's included on his documentary on said convoy, so I'm pretty sure it's PQ-17, unless it was another convoy and they failed to mention it. I don't think it was PQ-17. Mainly because let me just check. Yeah, the escort for PQ-17 Uh, there are some tribal class destroyers in the distant force. The only American destroyer is the USS Mariant, a Burnham class destroyer, a Rhind, and they're all back with USS Washington, North Carolina class battleship, and HMS Victorious, the illustrious, and King George V, the HMS Duke of York. I mean, so yeah, there's Victorious. They're all back in that group. So unless someone attacks the distant force, I don't think they get much of an attack. Let's see. The close force has HMS Somali in it, covering force, and USS Rowan, which is now a Benham class destroyer, plus USS Wichita, that's a heavy class cruiser, and Wainwright, Sims class destroyer. But that's sort of free. That's two British county class heavy cruisers and two American heavy cruisers and two American destroyers and one British destroyer. And then the close escort is entirely UK. Not a single US destroyer in the close escort. So if you're probably talking about some sort of attack at either hitting Cruiser Squadron 1 under Admiral Hamilton of the RN, or the distance force for it to be a US destroyer to be involved. And in both cases, well, if it's a distance force, if it's the covering force would make most sense, because if it's a distant force, then there is two American destroyers as part of the force, where there is 2, 4, 6, 8 full destroyers and, well, 7 full destroyers and 3 Hunt class destroyers as part of the home fleet distant force. Excellent. How did the L-class and Follops compare to Tribals? They were good ships, but they were built to more conventional fleet destroyer lines than Tribal class destroyer lines. But they had some similarities. I'll say sure. Are the Tribals an upscaled V&W class or a downscaled cruiser? They actually come from a cruiser study. So you can say to an extent they're a downscale cruiser, but it's more a case of we're going to take the destroyer hull and upscale that, and we're going to take the cruiser layout but give it destroyer weapons. So it's sort of the cruiser layout on an upscaled destroyer hull with destroyer weapons. Do you reckon you or Drac could narrate the colour footage of Hood from 1939? Be nice to hear some naval experts' input on such nice footage. Might well do that. Have a go at that. Jennifer Barrett, off topic, but a King George V with 60 inches? Good, bad? It would have been good. A 16-inch King George V would have been very good. They're good ships. They're fun ships. Sometimes on Admiral Alexander Clarke with Sean Austin Nightingale versus Admiral Drakenfell with RN. Are HMS Glorious and Escort still lost? Ooh. Let's be honest, if Drax in charge of the RN, he would have no more. Either one of us could do a better job than Lord Corkinori. And for starters, Glorious would not be going off on her own, so she would be traveling with Norfolk and destroyers, and he'd probably have them traveling in their groups. So if I catch any ships, then I'm probably outnumbered, and there's probably air reconnaissance after me. So probably not Glorious and etc. still lost because they'd be operating under better operational security. But maybe I might not get Scharnhorst and Gneisenau damaged because I know how I'd use them and what I'd go for. And I would play a slightly different game. I might still lose, but I'd play a slightly different game. So it'd be a case of I'd be playing it against a different opponent because I'd be playing against an opponent who'd be far more sensible in how he used his units and strategic in how he uses his units than Lord Corkinori. He certainly wouldn't allow a aircraft carrier to go frigging off on her own. But yeah. As usual, memory to articles that study also produces IDOs and the arrow fusers. 16-inch KGV would be a line. 16-inch KGV would have been a godsend. We had a KGV, we had working triple turrets. 9 16-inch guns on a King George V hull would have been far more easier to implement. Prince of Wales's guns would have actually been working properly. Prince of Wales and King George V would have been in service earlier. We might have even had Duke of York in service earlier, in which case Hood might have been in refit, and Bismarck might have found herself confronting the Duke of York and the Prince of Wales, which would be a very different scenario, because Duke of York and Prince of Wales with 16-inch guns versus Bismarck means Bismarck probably doesn't get to survive. Also, if they've got 16-inch guns, then you no longer have to partner them with the bigger gun ships to actually have a chance versus a bigger battleship. Oh my gosh, just like a sneaky Joe merchant ship, I'm going to have to sneak away, as my XO has said it's time for us to watch something on TV. Well, I'm glad. In fact, I'm glad she doesn't like songs of praise, because that means you've been able to watch me, although it's sometimes a very good program. But I would be very careful about calling her your XO. I'm sorry, Roland. I've chatted with her via email. I'm fairly certain if anyone's the commander of your ship, it's her. Have fun. Desert Boxer, you give Vice Admiral Fisher the plans for Iowa, Yamato, and Chunky Line in 1913. What's the direction? What is it? Vice Admiral, you give Admiral Fisher the plans for Iowa, Yamato, and Chunky Line in 1913. What is the direction? What did he do? The odds are the Queen Elizabeth class looked like a chunky line. It depends. He might still go to 15-inch gun because they've got the 15-inch gun, but he might try and go for the 18-inch program. He might try and jump straight to 18-inch. That'd be fun. Give them designs and go. These are what the Americans, the Japanese, and the chunky line. Let's say dress it up as someone else. I go. I'll considering building 16-inch guns, 16-inch guns, 18-inch guns. You probably see an 18-inch gun battleship come out the Royal Navy very quickly. Maybe in time for probably in time for Jutland. A couple of them in service in time for Jutland. Queen Elizabeth build around 18-inch guns, so Probably would have again 8 in 4 twin turrets. So 8 18-inch guns. Yep, that'd be nice. They'd have to be slightly longer, so they'd have to probably have the words with camel etc. They're going to extend their slipways. But they camel etc. would be quite happy to extend their slipways. If the Admiralty prefer to pay it, they do it. And in 1913, they get the money. Take care, Shrike 616. So, how many travels from the floor flotilla will be assigned to a ship like Hood? Usually you'd have half a flotilla, so you'd probably have 4. As I said, Vian could be there with his lead division or four ships, and Piron, so it could be 5 destroyers would normally be assigned. Sometimes you'd have a full flotilla assigned, especially if you have they know they've got Prince of Wales there and they have it available, they'd have the full flotilla if they could. Or they'd have a half flotilla of tribals and half flotilla of another class. Brandon, listen, what do you think of the Iowa class battleships if they've been armed with 18-inch guns instead of 16-inch 50s? If they've been armed with 18-inch 50s, then they would have been truly tremendously scary. Guy Anderson. 8 16-inch guns in 2 times 3 and 1 twin would have been fine. I think it would have been 3 trebles if in the Lions, because they had the treble turrets, and that would actually be more sensible than what they do with the quadruple twin quadruple look. That's sure. Would be interesting to watching you and Drac do blind operations wargaming these waters. It would be quite scary to watch us the wargaming. We haven't quite gotten to the level of playing of doing that yet, but it could be coming up at some point. Oh gosh, so true. Take care. Sure. Why didn't the QEs get the small tube boilers? Because the very, very good Jellicoe was overruled by idiots. I'm guessing it was either, in answer to your question, Guy Grandison, I still wish I knew where my father saw the paperwork that mentioned the 18-inch gun Queen ship in the 90s when he was working on the T-45 project. Probably Bath or possibly London, but one of those two. Maybe Woolwich, but probably Bath. That's where they did most of the work on the Type 45s. Probably met my dad at that point. John South, how useful would Agincourt be if you replaced the 2 midship turrets with boilers to get 27 knots? Very useful. So would battle cruisers be 16 inches in 3 times 2, or keep the 15s and have 4 times 2 mounts if BBs were 18s and 20s? That's an interesting debate. That would be, of course, the G3s go for the 16 inches. It'd be interesting. Probably they'd end up with smaller guns if they want to maintain speed, because there's disabilities in terms of size and the size of the space the guns take up, and it depends how big a ship you're prepared to build. Does Fox say, has any ship since Dreadnought had the same effect on as Dreadnought to a certain degree? Not really. Given the underlying tribal design was used for the post-war Iron gun destroyers, how much influence did they have on the ships built during the missile era? I would say that there has been a lot of returning to the structuring of those designs. Especially the Type 42s tried to go away from it, and I would argue the subsequent destroyers and vessels have gone back to it in terms of their framing and some of their designing in terms of strength. But guys, did the RN have limits of the Panama Canal in mind when designing ships like the US ended? Nope. They thought about the Suez Canal, not the Panama Canal. They honestly, there was always the potential in war that the Americans wouldn't allow them to use the Panama Canal, but also, more importantly, for the British, it might be quicker to get to Hawaii, etc., to go that way. But the British fleets are all in the home Mediterranean, and they're spread around the world. So it's the Mediterranean fleet, which is the rapid reaction fleet for the Far East, and then the home fleet would follow on from that. So they'd go Mediterranean, where they have their refueling stations, and then out the Indian Ocean, then to the Far East, because they're in the South China Sea is what they want to get to, and the Singapore Straits and the areas which are British and which are under their protection. So they'll be coming that way around. So Suez Canal is what matters to the British. The Royal Router. It's unfortunate that the 4.5-inch dual-purpose guns weren't available in greater numbers in the late 1930s. Tribes with dual-purpose main armament would have been more useful. Yes, they would have been. The 4.7 was supposed to be dual-purpose, but it wasn't really viable for dual-purpose. Didn't have a high enough angle. It's the Daring class which really do get that gun. But the point is, and the limitations, the reason is because they just couldn't get the upper deck mount. They could get the deck penetrating mount, which is what the battle class are built around, but they couldn't get the upper deck mount working in time. It would have taken probably another 1.5 to 2 years of peace to do it. Parliament wanted to be cheap and push for 13.5 gun at the treaty, 1/2-inch gun at treaties, hoping to reuse existing 13.5 with extended barrels and superchargers. Could the Iron force make this work? If forced, yes, they can make it work. They would probably kicking and screaming the whole way. Alfred B228, a bit of a different question. If France had a revolution in 1917 and then gone communist, what do UK do? Cry. Deal with it. I'll be back in a second. I just heard fox noises. Come here, Foxy. What are you going to do this time? Why is it every time doing it live? Oh, you're stuck again. Oh, stop. Don't worry, free range fluffy assistant research assistant is now again free range. Ay, caramba. Hey. I'm glad. So I have been slightly worried about that fox. We've had 3 foxes killed in our road in in a short period recently, and I was sort of worried that my sort of free range fluffy research assistant, as I tend to refer to her, because I'm fairly sure it's a female fox, have been hurt. But I still don't know how she gets down there, because I've blocked off both ends. So she must be doing some major parkour to make it. Okay, now that's gone weird. Eesh. Okay, this has gone a bit wild. Let me just try and work out what happened to the questions while I was away dealing with Foxy. Oh, that's that. Recognize that one. France Revolution. I'm the France Revolution going communist. That's just weird. Alice Short. Suez Wider. Yes. Suez Wider. That's a good one. The RN gets 16 tribal class GP frigates. How scared is everyone? If that's today, then probably people think Britain's gone and conquering again. Senator, what if all tribals, battles, and darings were darings? Then someone's very, very scared. Very, very scared. That's a lot of firepower. Those darings would have been freaking scary for anyone to deal with. Guy Granson, by the way, Dr. Clarke, what's going on? Did you look at Bap Fair at all for your book, as she survived until recently? Well, she didn't survive, unfortunately, to that recently, but I did look at her in terms of I did consider trying to include her in the book, but the thing was COVID hit, and so my plans pre-COVID to go to Canada, to go to Australia, to go carrying around and try and get as much information about these other ships didn't happen. So I had to rewrite the book to an extent and take out the sections which were going to involve them. I'm not sure how to put this, but if Bismarck is a 10-10, what would a 1941 Hood score on a 10 of 10 scale, and what would modernized Hood score? Trying to grasp how mismatched Hood, both modernized and not, will be going up against Bismarck. Okay, considering how hilariously inefficient the Bismarck design is, hilariously inefficient, if you consider what it gets for the tonnage it has, in terms of firepower, rate of fire, in terms of speed and everything, for an armor protection for the weight it has, for the displacement it has. If that's your 10 out of 10, then a modernized Hood is probably an 11 out of 10, and an unmodernized Hood is probably, depending on how you're viewing it, either an 8 or 9 out of 10, depending on how you're making the scale. But Ron Larson, what does the fox say? The fox says hello. Oh. If I wanted to, I wouldn't have to call an armor division. I've got a corgi, which would dearly like to play games with the fox, and I've got a poodle who probably would just have fun. Nanhun, free range fluffy research assistant, the fox, or is this a vixen? Can approximately so much save herself? Does that mean she get a sea vixen? I think probably is a sea vixen. Dove Squad, you're assuming that she's starting from the ends you've blocked off. Well, there's no hole in the fence. I've checked. So, unless she's got some magical ability to come in the top. Does Admiral W. Pound deserve a better place in history? Yes. It would have made the KGBs even worse. Yes. Haida, my beauty. What goes to plan in June, I see you. She's a beautiful looking ship, isn't she? She really is.
It's her 80th birthday this year. She was launched in August 1942. You'd never know it looking at her. Doesn't look a day over 18. Gorgeous. Beautifully preserved.
Going down oh well, for a book two, Darings in the Cold War. I'm working on book two, but I've got an idea for what second edition of this book would have included if I've managed to visit both Haida and Vampire, and there are enough orders, enough people buying these books for the publishers to come back to me and go, we'd like to put together a second edition, then those chapters would go back in because I'd have the primary material. I wouldn't do chapters on these ones because if I did them on the Canadians and I did them on the Australians, I'd be entirely reliant upon secondary material, and I don't feel that's fair to do to other historians because that's me making money off their research. I don't mind using their research as a guidance to go and find the research, but I like to be able to do the research myself. So I can honestly say I have done that work. I haven't just read their work and put it in my own words. But guy, tell me, what would you consider the other major navies version of the tribal class? Not everyone has them because not everyone needs them. Okay, the U.S. Navy is spamming out light cruisers like no tomorrow, so they don't need a tribal class destroyer. They need their destroyers for different things. The Germans' destroyers they're just not. They're just not. They are also building cruiser formed destroyers, but they're trying to go with cruiser level guns in destroyer hulls, and that just doesn't work. It produces guns which have a hilariously low rate of fire and just get spammed by destroyers. And I do love the way the World of Warships are talking already about these ships versus light cruisers and what they're going to have an impact on. And in my experience, they're not going to have much of an impact on anything because they have the same. They have the same. The problem is that the light cruiser will tend to have a higher rate of fire than they will, and that's the trouble. They have a too low rate of fire. They might have the individual gun capacity to actually deal damage to a cruiser, but to be honest, with a light cruiser, the level of armor they have, so could this, so could a tribal, and that had destroy level guns. And the thing is, that would actually have more of a chance because that could spam a lot more shells at the cruiser than the German destroyer can. So I have a feeling they're just going to end up getting beaten up. There's a foxo. Foxes can parkour like cats. Our local ones sit on the roof tormenting our greyhounds. That is what I'm presuming. I've seen a fox jump 6 feet easily. How tall is your fence? About 7 foot. Although one of the ends might be slightly less than 6 foot. But it's quite. It's a big block I put up there. Stafford Thompson, I'm looking forward to it. And I will hope that if we can give you enough warning, you can come and see me in Drac while we're there, Stafford. Shamak, did you see my questions about Crutchley? I don't think I have yet. That's sure, but is what is the step down about in the design as opposed to being a flush decker? It's pretty much the RN's a methodology of trying to keep the weight down, but also to deal with the North Atlantic and the North Sea, because they realise that for those particular waters, with the waves being high enough, you want to have as high a forecast as possible, so it can deal with the waves without getting swept over. But then you need to have weight saving and it's stepped down, and also it helps for the torpedoes because it means they don't have as high to drop into the water. That's right. Penguins of Madagascar taught me that any rock, tree, or similar plant on the landscape can contain a secret passage for the animal in question. Mm-hmm.
Number 60. What ship is that? HMCS Haida. It's gorgeous. Odd questions. Do they still have the ability to move Belfast turrets, or have they been maintained? To that standard since 1971? They have been maintained to that standard. I think they can still move them. I don't think they have recently, but I think they can. Brandon Larson. I'm planning on going back to college to become a high school history teacher. Do you have any tips? Always remember, not everyone learns the same way. So, not everyone has the same access point into history. When you're teaching, the trick is to find the students' access point into history, how they find their route into history, not to try and teach them your route into history. So, I have students who they study, their approach through history is to learn it through football teams, and that's fine. And I will explain the context of what's going on with the football teams around the time, and get them through to the history of that point and what relates them. And that's fine. That's their way into history. So it's find your students' way into history. That's two cute-looking girlies, isn't it? Yeah. Very pretty ladies, these two. Very pretty ladies. So they would rather have a lower free ward, but North Sea is mad. Pretty much. They'd rather have... I think in the nicest way, they'd prefer to have had a higher... they would have been quite happy with a flush deck, but they'd wanted the higher flush deck because they'd have made the torpedo survive. They'd have worked it out, and that space would have been useful. But the thing was, it also stops the ship being as top heavy, so it's always helpful. John Mike, did Crutchy's career stall out because of Stavo Island? If so, do you think it's warranted? Yes, to an extent. Right. Let's go to Narvik, shall we? It was almost exactly a month after the Altmark incident when Cossack was back under the command of Commander Sherbrooke, who would go on to become a Rear Admiral and earn a Victoria Cross whilst in command of the destroyer Onslow, that she would achieve her next battle honour at the Second Battle of Narvik. This battle would demonstrate the value of having an armament of a larger number of faster firing guns rather than fewer heavier guns. The First Battle of Narvik on 10th April 1940 had been a wild affair. German ships had been badly damaged during the battle, but they had retained control of the water, while the British lost the majority of what had been a fairly effective flotilla. The second battle, on the 30th of April 1940, would correct the result. This battle had three significant differences from the first. There was a battleship in support, Warsprite. Her Swordfish airplane was able to scout ahead, and the Navy was sent in its fighting destroyers to Tribal class. Fairly sure I wrote seaplane for that one, but it seems to have been corrected to airplane. Microsoft Word will blame. The force deployed under Admiral Whitworth contained, in addition to Warspite, 9 destroyers, 4 tribals, Cossack, Bedouin, Eskimo, and Punjabi. The 1935 constructed H-class, Hero, whose sisters had fought in the First Battle of Narvik, the 1936 I-class Icarus, the 1939 K-class Kimberley, and 2 1934 F-class vessels, Forester and Foxhound. These last 5 ships were very much treaty destroyers, built to the letter of the agreements, and designed for torpedo attack. Although good ships, they were at a disadvantage compared to the tribal vessels in the fast-flowing skirmishes which followed. It was a significant force, designed to finish off any remaining German naval forces in the Narvik area, and capable of dealing with any defences that the Germans had managed to erect after the first battle. The effect of the aerial reconnaissance was felt almost immediately. One German destroyer, Erich Kellner, had been so badly damaged during the first battle of Narvik that she was judged fit for an ambush only. However, she never made it to her ambush point of Tastad. Instead, upon sighting the British force making their way in, she and her escort, Hermann Kuhn, split up, with Kellner retreating to Dutrecht Bay, from where she was still hoped to launch an ambush at an opportune moment. It was not to be. They were spotted by the Swordfish crew, and when the starboard column of destroyers, the 3 tribals, Bedouin, Punjabi, and Eskimo, rounded the entrance to Dutrecht, British guns and torpedoes had already been sighted. The This resulted in a very quick, almost one-sided exchange. A torpedo and the destroyer's shells were fired in an initial salvo. These were quickly followed by shells from Warspite, as she too rounded the southern point. Unsurprisingly, under such a weight of firepower, Kolner rolled over and sunk. Hermann Kuhn had used this time to raise the alarm and had formed up with Hans Ludemann, Wolfgang Zenker, and Bernhard von Anrum to make a run at the British force together. This resulted in a melee similar to the First Battle of Narvik, but this time the Germans were forced to back up the fjord by the Navy's solid front, a line of destroyers, constantly altering course and speeds as necessary to avoid the enemy fall of shot whilst maintaining a steady and continuous pressure. It is here that the qualities of the tribal's firepower come to the fore. However, it was not only their strength of firepower, but also their strength of design which was tested. Punjabi attacked particularly heavy fire, suffering much damage and casualties. But after retiring for an hour to repair herself, she rejoined the force fully combat capable, highlighting once again the resilience enshrined in the tribal class design. The Hermann Kuhn split from the other three and made for the Herringsford, but was pursued and torpedoed by Eskimo, forcing her captain to beach her. At this point, the British destroyers divided into two groups, one heading into Narvik harbour, led by Cossack, and the remainder, led by Eskimo, following the German destroyers as they made for Romansfjord. Cossack, discovering Narvik harbour still held a German destroyer, the Diefer von Röder. This vessel had been largely immobilised in the first battle, but still put up such a fierce fire that Whitworth, looking on from Warspite, thought it was a shore battery. Despite this heavy fire and grounding on the wreck, while manoeuvring and firing, Cossack silenced her opponent. She had sustained damage, including one shell that penetrated her transmitting station, which housed the church clock for a fire control system, whilst another shell severed the main steep pipe and yet another damaged the boiler room. Despite this, she kept firing on local control, with the gunnery crews demonstrating their training by doing all the fire control work manually. Targets included a troublesome German mortiser on the shore, but the job mainly comprised of methodically working through any other German craft in the harbour, and some Norwegian craft as well. The damage suffered by Cossack and Punjabi paled in comparison to that which Eskimo survived, however. Eskimo, twice bowerless but unbowed. Some people are described as being born under a lucky star, and if viewed in that way, Eskimo must have been launched under an unusually lucky star. She had a long war. She had joined 6th SDF, the Home Fleet Tribal Destroyer Fleet, just in time for the 1939 Combined Fleet exercise at Gibraltar, where, by highlighting the strength of the fleet, the Navy tried to buy time for diplomacy. After Easter leave, she was, with her sisters Asante and Metabale, on a goodwill visit to Cherbourg. Once again, naval diplomacy was at work, but on this occasion it was more than about soft power and building of relationships, than about the open display of naval strength which took place at Gibraltar. Following this, her high level of activity continued unabated. Eskimos evolved in the Thetis disaster and almost fought a battle with Faulkner, Foxhound, and Firedrake during a night passage to Scapa Flow in September 1939, when both groups were at high alert and failed to recognise each other. With her draw towards action, it's unsurprising she was in the 4th Estuary when the first air raid took place on the 17th of October. Her activities did not stop there, and after a winter of patrols, convoys, and maintenance, she was refitted just in time for the Norway campaign. All the 3 Narvik battles were dirty, fast, and hard. They were close-range destroyer fights, and the difficulty for the Germans was that these were the fights for which the tribal class had been built. They were the fighting cover, the suppressing fire that would allow their more conventional destroyer sisters to get close enough to launch a mass torpedo attack, which, according to contemporary theory, would decide a battle. For the ships of this class, with their all-round fields of fire, the swirling nature of smoke and metal and fire was their métier. Eskimo was to the fore, and exposed that she was lost. Her whole bow forward of B-mount, nonetheless, she kept on fighting. Eskimo being the last to join the force that was being amassed, and almost immediately upon arrival took up station in the starboard line, relative to Warspite, with her sisters Punjabi and Bedouin. Cossack was on the port line with Kimberley and Foxhound. During transit, these lines remained stationed close to Warspite. Once Ossifjord was reached, they were thrown forward for optimum offensive impact. First blood went to Eskimo and her sisters on the starboard line, due to in large part to Warspite's swordfish aircraft, which had spotted the Erik Kolner loitering with intent just inside the entrance to Bollingford, leading to Duvvik. This turned a potential ambush into a one-sided rout. The guns of the 3 tribals enveloped the Erik Kolner in such fire that she had no chance to avoid a torpedo fired by Bedouin, which disabled her, let alone mount a proper defence. The fight continued all the way up to Otterfjord, where German vessels joined the fray, only to be forced back under the weight of fire. There was something more conventionally designed British destroyers could not have achieved, but for which the design tribals made them more than capable. Eskimo and Herman Kuhn veered off from the main fight. The German vessel, probably seeking to work around the British destroyers and either make a run for Warspite or the open sea, or engage in a one-on-one duel. Steaming at speed while firing with everything they had, the engagement ended suddenly when Eskimo emerging victorious and the Herman Kuhn sunk by a torpedo in Heringsfjord. Her men had certainly acquitted themselves with honour. So after this action that the fight reached the harbour of Narvik. It was there that the British destroyers divided into groups. One led by Kosagak forced its way into Narvik, while the other, led by Eskimo, continued to chase the retreating Germans. The battle was now in its final phase. Surging at Robinsfjord after the remaining German destroyers, Eskimo, Bedouin, Hero, Icarus, and Forrester reached the point, two-thirds of the way up, where it suddenly narrows. The British destroyers knew it would be the perfect trap. Eskimo went first. Forrester and Hero followed, close behind. Eskimo was fulfilling the role for which her class had been built, providing cover to allow the conventional destroyers and torpedo destroyers to get closer to the enemy. This she was succeeding in doing, shepherding her small force through the narrows and towards the denouement of the battle. The British destroyers pushed the Germans under a remorseless hail of fire, the Germans responding as best they could. One of their number, Georg Fuel, had become a blazing wreck, but in a last act of defiance, she rolled over and sank, launched her torpedoes. As Eskimo, along with her charges, avoided other torpedoes launched by the hands of Lilleman, and tried herself to fire her last torpedo, one of Fuel's struck her forward. The torpedo stuck like Thor's hammer Mjolnir, taking off with one blow Eskimo's bow section up to the B mount and obliterating both A mount along with 17 crew. The strength of this design is revealed in subsequent events. Eskimo did not stop. She completed her turn, fired a torpedo, and B mounting crew continued firing until the ammunition ran out. The crew went to work lightening the upper works and shoring up the bulkheads so that she could get home. The battle was over. Any German ships not sunk by this point had been beached by their crews, and the British destroyers were busy making sure they were properly wrecked and that no other useful shipping could be salvaged from the fjords. Eskimo, meanwhile, managed to reverse out of the fjord and was escorted back to the UK by her sister Bedouin, together with the two destroyers hostile in Ivanhoe. Thus ended Narvik, one of the most notable destroyer actions of the early part of the war. The battle demonstrated again how tough and versatile the travel destroyers were. Even discounting Operation Irregular, Eskimo dodged potential destruction on a regular basis. And though she suffered more than enough severe damage, she never completely succumbed like so many of her colleagues. Not only did she lose her bow at Narvik, but she lost it for a second time later in the war in a collision with Javelin, took part in the Lofoten raid and the Bismarck chase, and received a major bomb damage in 1943. Eskimo played a significant part in many operations, including, together with Shanti and Tata, Operation Torch, Operation Husky, and Operation Neptune. Her use in such an array of missions is proof of the tribal class design's versatility. She epitomized the fighting spirit associated with the tribals, so clearly demonstrated by Cossack when called upon to engage the Outmark, or by Sikh at Sirte in 1942. This was a spirit of resilience, persistence, and leadership, over and above what duty expected. It was a spirit which was the hallmark of a class's service, and which was a constant theme of Eskimo's career. Melanie, don't torture poor Stafford. Right, let's see. That's it. So if the four tribal class destroyers, four tribal class destroyers were with the VN, and that's normally what it is. But if they'd had a full squadron there, a full flotilla, that would have been 8. But they'd have had their two. If they'd had a full flotilla, they would have probably had their 2 Polish pals along with them as well. So it might have been 10 destroyers. So if the tribal class destroyers present in the hunt for Bismarck at Hood's Battle, so if the 6 tribal class destroyers present in the hunt for Bismarck at Hood's Battle with Bismarck, they'd pull a Johnson in their bodyguard duty of Hood. Yes. Anyway, how useful would a modern cruiser ship be? Depends. If you're talking about a ship built for the cruising role, they're always useful and they're still built for that. If you're talking about a modern cruiser, as in something like we're defined today as a primary surface combatant or large surface combatant, again, they're useful. They're expensive, but they're useful. Depends how many numbers you're going to build. If it's one ship, then it's a case of, right then, occasionally we're going to have a really useful escort and surface of war combatant. If it's 4 or 5, then it's sort of useful. 6 is really good. 12 is spectacular. Sometimes, totally serious. I ran 13.5 miles yesterday on a crew of HMS Queen Mary. My longest run ever. Cool. Simon Philoka. 4 troubles went in, 3 and 7/8 came home. Mm-hmm. So Germany in World War II made the opposite mistake than they did with their first battlecruiser, attempting big guns on a small hull rather than small guns on a battlecruiser. Yep. Sounds good to me, Stafford. As sure, the destroyers have spectacular names. They are fun. Kevin Tank, did Warspite sink any of the German ships? Well, to be honest, the Eric Kulner, there is the sheer weight of fire. So we call that a group kill. But yeah, she does engage with her secondaries and primaries, and 15-inch guns are not good for destroyers when they can't move. Captain Singles, how many sets? She went through 2. Her bow had to be fully rebuilt twice. Had to be partially rebuilt a few more times than that, but twice she had to have a completely new bow put on. That's good. Was HMS Warfight secretly an orc? It seems to be almost everywhere, always yelling "wah" and charging towards a fight at every opportunity. She has a soul. She has a warrior soul. Does Warspite? As sure. So the shovels were used until they were completely trashed or sunk because they're best for tools for most jobs. Pretty much. It's one of the interesting things. When I first started researching about it, there was a general perception about tribal class destroyers. Well, so many of them lost, they must have been a bad design. And then you sort of go, well, what kind of missions were they lost in? Were they doing the day-to-day missions? No. Pretty much every time someone comes up and goes, we've got this really high-risk special mission. Where are the tribal destroyers? Ah, yes, you're going to do it. Ouch. Mm. Mm-hmm. Don't new Active Forces and do. How long did it take for coal to stop being used as a fuel for merchant ships? That's an interesting question. I seem to remember reading an article that the last coal-fired merchant ship to be built was built in the 1960s. And I don't know where I read that, and I don't know if it's true, but I seem to remember reading it. I think it was in one of my dad's books. So it's probably true. And probably about 25 years after that, unless they didn't upgrade on it. Because coal was a fairly good fuel for certain ships. If you're in certain parts of the world, coal is still readily available, and yeah, sometimes, especially once you get onto you get to sort of the scenario where you can conveyor. You can load coal without needing. You've got a mechanical shovel rather than a human doing it. It can become quite effective. No, they had to do a full job for the barrels for Eskimo. Sam Dawson. So, okay, how useful would a modern cruise ship be as a ship of the line with the windows and the suites having having cannons on them? If you can take it back to the age of sail and you have a cruise ship which you can actually power, I'm not sure where you're going to get the gas or oil from. You could probably get coal from somewhere, but if you could get a coal powered one. But yeah, if you could do a modern design and you had cannon instead of windows, it could be quite scary for anyone. It could be really scary. It could be quite fun, but scary. Well, similarly, 640, 15-inch guns aren't good for destroyers even when they can move, which they won't be able to do much longer when the 15-inch gun gets involved. The trick, if you have a 15, if you have a destroyer fighting a battleship, is to try and get close enough that the turning rate of the gun cannot match the speed of your movement. That's basically it. Get far close. Vintage car history. Hello, VCH. Hope you're well. HMS Utmost was the only ship in the Royal Navy to carry the name. Why? It's got the same kind of cool factor as Warspite, Victory, and Intrepid. Just haven't got around to having another U class to have it. Alistair Shaw, but that strikes me as the opinion of Nelsons. They were also used until they were trashed. They cannot be as bad as everyone wants to sort of think. Well, people like to try and think the Nelsons are bad. I have to admit, I have a problem with the Nelsons in that I think they could have been a lot better, but I don't think the design itself is necessarily bad. I'm not a big fan of the all-forward gun arrangement, but if I'd been doing it, I'd have probably gone with the F3 design with C turret being the raised turret, so all 9 guns could fire forward, and I'd probably gone for a slightly higher speed. But the British went for a very solid, heavy armour, and you have Churchill basically thinking of Nelson and Rodney as these unsinkable citadels standing at either end of the British battle line, blasting away at any enemy, destroying them. And you sit there and go, you have no idea how the Royal Navy plans to use the battleships, do you? Absolutely none. You are completely off at sea. The Royal Navy in 1930, basically the Royal Navy by about the time that Nelson and Rodney are built, are no longer thinking in terms of the concept of the battle line. They are training for it and still have it, but they do not think of the entire fleet getting together as a battle line being a likely scenario. They just don't. Because the only fleet they could that would ever be likely is against the Americans, and if you're going against the Japanese, the British idea was to have squadrons. So would have a fast squadron of battle cruisers, etc., going off doing their job, and with fast ships, and then you have the battle squadrons formed up into different groups doing their jobs and their missions, and basically overwhelmed the Japanese by being in multiple places at the same time. So the Japanese battle line could go, yes, we have superiority over every one group. But the trouble is, if the British have 2 groups come together, we would have to bring our whole group to take on any one group. And if we do that, they'll bring in a second group, and then we're not able to stop whatever the third group's doing, and their 2 groups versus us is going to be enough to cause us serious damage. I'm sure the Waverley was moved onto oil-fired and is refit in the early 2000s. Yes. Anyway, I've been giving a mission brief. I have a special mission and need 2 volunteers. Eskimo, Haida, you'll do. To be fair, that was actually what he said at one point. We'll leave it on one side. Although I don't think Haida. I think it was Huron. I'm not sure. Might have been Haida. Oh, Thompson, R7. I'm not even getting into that maths. That's quite scary. Trying to figure out. Master George Newton. 10 inches are not good for a destroyer's health when they have as much range of motion as a tank in a narrow street. Hmm. That's good. Powering a modern cruise ship in the 1700s, could alcohol be distilled to have the energy density needed? That's probably the most likely thing you can actually come up with. It would be interesting. Rosa, watch Master and Commander of the Far Side of the World yesterday. How long would it take a crew to private Grog and run to mutiny? Would depend on the officers. Yes, Jack Ray, we have discussed that on Nelson's. Vintage Coffee, the question of about fuel. Draken FLI filmed an interview where I do directly answer that question. It'll be live on both our channels sometime in March. Not enough space to chat and chat to answer. Cool. There's a Voxer. On battleships and destroyers that carry the same guns, how did the turrets change between the ship classes? Okay, on battleships, you'd have a between deck mount, which is what you see on the battle class. And that basically means you have a mount down below, you have all sorts of turret structure down below. So it's like a cruiser or a battleship turret, only smaller for a 4.5-inch gun. For a destroyer, normally you have what's called an upper deck mount, which is sort of like these, but it would be enclosed turret structure. And that's what takes the time to develop, which is why the Daring class are so special, because they're the first implementation of this 4.5-inch upper deck mount. And that means all the mechanism, everything is on the top, and it is in the turret and doesn't need to have any penetration below it, other than the ammunition hoists. So, yeah, they're potent. Normally, the difference is also the level of armor and weight of them. The UD mount tends to be lighter, and therefore better for a destroyer. If you want to really change World War II, you have the British get the UD mount before UD 4.5, working in about 1934. So they can design the tribals with it, and they can design other ships with it, because then you have a true dual-purpose weapon. And if you have 4.5s, upper deck mount 4.5s, four of them on a tribal class destroyers, then suddenly those air attacks, which do what they do in World War II, will do a lot less in World War II, because they'll be getting such a rain of fire. You'd also have difference in terms of the performance of other destroyers. If you could stand it on a sunrise on the upper deck 4.5 earlier. Okay, so did any US battleships operate in the Mediterranean during World War II? From memory, I can't remember if any turned up for. I don't think in Operation Torch they got into the Mediterranean. I think they were on the North Atlantic. And then it would be the ones which come afterwards. Order of battle, order of battle, order of battle. Where is the order of battle? Borough. Oh, let's see. Oh, Darlan, you annoying person. I'm not sure. I don't think the Americans do the Western Task Force that invades Morocco. So yeah, but the Western Task Force and the Central and Eastern Task Force are British, so that wouldn't get in. That's the British stuff going into the Mediterranean, and they're the British warships doing that. So probably Sicily, Operation Husky. Sorry about this, everyone. Me thinking out loud, but it's an interesting question. So I would say Operation Husky, order of battle. Naval forces. There are definitely. Well, there are definitely the US destroyers in there. But the rest seems to be a very mixed discussion. It's interesting. Come on. It's wonderful order of battle list, but it hasn't got the warships listed. That's great. I'm gonna presume there are some American battleships in, but probably they're older standards. Probably. Sorry about that taking so long. And I'd say from about Husky onwards. That's ignorant. So why would people be worried if the British were going conquering if they got 17 tribal frigates or 17 if included Cossack? Kind of an imperial name, isn't it? The tribal class. John Shea. Well, thank you, Doctor. I'll finish you later. Take care, John Shea. Jack Ray, does ship weight balance 4.5 affect destroyer gunnery much? Yes. You try and balance it as best you can. Are the turrets and the bearings basically the same as on later iron frigates like the Anders? To a large extent, yes. Those are improved versions of the bearings. Bearings are the first fitting of the double 4.5 upper deck turret. Grom destroyers. Honestly, the tribals are probably. Honestly, the tribals better suit their role than the Groms do, and the Groms better suit their Groms role than the tribals do, as they're viewed from it. George Moon. Okay, that was Texas, Nevada at Dragoon, and also Arkansas. You mentioned that the secondary guns on the battleship were armored. Why? It seems like a necessary weight. Simply because they're armored because of blast damage from primary guns. You don't want to lose your secondary guns in a melee fight. Like, I don't know. I think a US light cruiser got hit by a Fritz bomb. I don't know if it was Arkansas or New York. Might have made it in Med. I think a fair number of American battleships did, but I don't think they did at Torch, Dragoon, though, and Husky. I'm fairly sure they went there. So let's do Namsos. Now, with the disposal of enemy destroyers, the Navy had secured the control of the sea, which had eluded them after the First Battle of Narvik. This was exploited throughout the remainder of the Norwegian campaign, and the tribal flotillas were significant participants. Afridius, flotilla leader, was head of the amphibious operation conducted around Namsos as part of the Central Norway campaign, and playing a vital role supporting the land forces. During the preliminary reconnaissance, for instance, it was 4th DF which investigated the possible landing sites and was key to the selection of Namsos. For the insertion of troops, Somali was left behind to help establish a base at Namsos, after which the tribals escorted the converted liner troopships to Namsos and ferried the troops to Lijernia. For operational command, both Afridi and Somali were used as general headquarters by Major General Carton de Weert. For both assignments, the increased size of the tribal design and the space it provided in comparison with other destroyers was crucial. At the same time, their size in comparison to larger cruisers meant they could operate with greater nimbleness further up the narrow fjords. Later, after withdrawal, in an operation that had foreshadowed the evacuation from Dunkirk a few weeks later, the Navy earned high praise from Carling Wyatt. In the course of the last endless day, I got a message from the Navy to say that they would evacuate the whole of my force that night. I thought it was impossible, but learned a few hours later the Navy do not know that word. Such involvement could not be without cost. On the 3rd of May 1940, exactly 2 years after her commission, during a transit home following the successful withdrawal, Afridi's luck ran out. As the convoy of transports and escorts reached the main fleet, a large force of Stukas attacked. Afridi was bracketed by two attacking dive bombers. Already turning to starboard, Captain Vian decided to continue to turn, but despite this attempt to evasion, Afridi was hit. The first bomb landing in the foremost boiler room, causing massive damage and starting a fire. The second taking out much of the hull portside just forward of the bridge. This proved too much damage even for a tribal destroyer to take, although, judging from Esko's experience, she might well have coped with either one or the other. But not both. Captain Vian and most of the ship's company were rescued before she rolled over and sank. From this point on, Cossack became the 4th DF's main leader, a role that raised her to even greater prominence in the next major operation. Afridi and the 4th DF had succeeded in their mission. The troops had been withdrawn and not a single transport lost. As at Dunkirk, so at Namsos, the Navy had covered the army's back. Even before the Norwegian campaign was over, the use of tribals in destroyer flotilla formations was reduced. Subsequently, this accelerated, due in part to their losses and in part to the shrinking of flotillas for strategic reasons. But mostly, it was due to the operational need for these capable vessels elsewhere. Their fighting power and the morale that they could lend to other destroyers had been recognised. It now became more common for the class to operate in pairs. For example, by 17th May 1940, Mohawk and Nubian had been transferred from the 4th DF to the 14th DF and returned to the Mediterranean. However, there were still occasions when 4 or more tribals would be grouped together in future battles, some of which will be discussed in later chapters. Now, one of the more interesting little battles, which they're not quite sure which tribal class destroyer gets involved in, but we knew that to tribal. And I think from the description, it's Asante, but I'm not 100% sure. I have a reason for thinking it's Asante, but I'll leave it to one side. So they are supporting Namsos, and there is a German gun mounted on a railway carriage, which keeps bombarding positions and then hiding in a tunnel. And basically, Asante plays cat and mouse with this. And the gun comes out, boom, 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 and then dives away. Gives you an idea of where it is, but they tried firing back, but didn't get in time. Okay. Comes out a second time, bum, 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 and then dives away. All right. They sort of time it to just about before when they think it would start firing them again, as in it had come out a third time. And they do what they can do with 8 120mm rapid firing guns. In that the area where they go for what would be best be called grid square elimination. They fire approximately, I think it's 120 shells, which, if you think they can fire roughly 8 every 5 seconds, you then start to realize that is 12 times 8, that's 96 fired in the first minute. And then roughly another 24, so it's a little over a minute and 15 seconds firing. When they go and do some reconnaissance afterwards, for some reason, they manage to get a boat crew to the shore who go and do a look. They find no survivors left. The Germans seem to have evacuated. But the shell, the carriage that was being used to fire the gun from is decimated. The gun's gone, and the railway line is gone as well. And there's basically an area which has just been turned into a reenactment of the Somme. They do all sorts of little operations like this throughout the campaign, and some of the stories make it in the book, but some of them don't, because you only have so many spaces, so many words you can put in the book. And there are things which when I read back, I wish I'd added in and just had the argument over word numbers. But that might have caused something else to be cut. That's the trouble. I know so much. I've studied these books, these ships so well. I have so many little stories. Remember, is it would a flotilla of battles or darings have been useful in the Falklands? Darings would have been pretty useful, mainly for naval gunfire support and for air defense with their 40 millimeters. It would have been better to have had better armed modern ships, but they could have been useful. Remember, is it what are you reading from? I'm reading from my own book. I'm cheating. Good luck, Stephen Richards. Enjoy the dog walk. There's a Foxer. Was there any plans to modernise, replace the older guns and fortifications at Gibraltar and Malta in the New World Wars? Mount some old 13.5-inch guns at Gibraltar for when Force H was away. They did look at it, but they had 9-inch guns and they thought they were enough from their ground positions. That's good. Has there ever been an action where the aggression trained into Royal Navy has proved to be a hindrance rather than an advantage? There have been times when it's been taken when it could have gone either way, and there have been scenarios, even in World War II, where it could have been problematic. But as a rule, on the balance, the aggression has tended to bear more fruit than it's caused trouble. Because you have to remember, the Royal Navy trains officers to be aggressive and to attack the enemy, but they don't train them to be stupid either. It's a calculated risk scenario, and that's what you always have to treat it as, a calculated risk. Alistair Short, that sounds like Dunkirk too. Darren don't understand No Impossible, and don't think Darren and Paul Hamilton knew what physics were either. That's occasionally things. Hello, Wayne Warren. Rats, just remember it's Sunday. I missed the start. Don't worry, Wayne. Paul Johnson, perhaps you should have done book for each class. Maybe. I think my plan for my next book is to do a far bigger study. But yeah, I know it's going to be problematic to get people to publishers to take it up, even if this one sells well, because it's going to be kind of stepping into an area which is dominated by a couple of big names already. But the thing is, I think it's a good way to go, and I think it's a good book topic to do to build upon what I've done with TBD, which is look at the longer term implications of what's being built. This is not just this class; it's this period, and it's what they're thinking about, and it's why these three classes matter and come together. What a coincidence! I had that very good book. I'm glad you do. Which three ships are those? Tribals, battles, and darings. And these three ships at the front. If I remember correctly, the one I always have to check the number of is the Daring class, because that's the one I always forget the numbers of. For some reason, the Daring class I don't associate with their numbers at all. I don't know why. But the Battle class, I know their numbers. The Tribals, I know their numbers. But the Daring class, I remember their names. I don't remember their numbers. The tribal is HMS Tartar, mainly because a little salute to Ludovic Kennedy. And the battle is R60, which was, if I remember correctly, yeah, the R80, which was Barfleur. Yeah. And the daring D108. What was the name? Oh, let's go for that. Dainty. Yeah. You see, this is the thing. I remember Dainty, and I can tell you all the story of Dainty, but I don't remember his D108 because Dainty is such a cool little name. I realise I keep playing with my ear this evening, but that's joy of having your dog lick your ear, decide to lick your ears really deeply. There's all sorts of weird wax goes in places. It's irritating. Sorry. Very correct, Dr. Sam Thompson. Yeah, the 3 seagulls are for my 3 great uncles who died in the Fleet Air Army in World War II. Looks like one's in Home Fleet grey and the other 2 are in Foreign Station colour schemes. Yeah, to an extent. There's also in the fact that the grey changes over a period of time. Don't worry, Stafford. I'm glad you went to see your mum. There's Voxer. Did the tribals doctrinally and in reality work with light cruisers and heavy cruisers? If so, what are roles given that cruisers had the gunfire down? They do work with the light cruisers and the heavy cruisers. There's Force K in the Mediterranean, and there's also, which was the raiding force, which was structured around tribals and air refusers. And there is the whole thing at Taranto, the cruiser force, the force that goes into the Adriatic is 3 cruisers and 2 tribal class destroyers. For a very good reason. The tribals are there to make sure the cruisers get out. Take care, John, tomorrow. 640. Dainty is an amazing name. You care more about you care more about you playing with us than we do. Thank you. With Dainty, I have to say this is one of my annoyances with the daring class as we're built, because if you think about it, and if I go to the thing I have in here, I have the table for the daring class destroyers in here. I love those pictures. Where did it end up going? Trying to remember which page ended up getting the I know we moved it around about 4 times. Daring class. So the daring class names in 1949 Diamond, Daring, Duchess, Defender, Dainty, Decoy, Delight, and Diana. Now, we've added in Duncan into the 6. But, if we had built a 9 Type 45s, we've got Daring, we've got Dauntless, we've got Diamond, we've got Dragon, we've got Defender and Duncan. So we have Daring, Diamond, and Defender as the traditional D-class names. So any more ships, if we built another 6 ships, we would have had this number names for them. But if we built another 3 ships, we could have picked from Duchess. We could have picked from, I don't know, Dainty. We could have picked from Decoy, Delight, and Diana. So, there you go. Which 3 do you think would have picked? I had to say, I would like an HMS Delight, an HMS Dainty, and I think if the Royal Navy had announced that they were building an HMS Diana, I doubt she would have been cancelled. In fact, if the Royal Navy had been sensible, that would have been a way to stop the Daring class being cut short to 6 ships. Just announce that a 9th one will be called HMS Diana. Watch the number of people watch the government going, but we're trying to save money. You're cancelling Diana? I know it's terrible. There's part of me which just hates myself for thinking of this and thinking that would have been a way to, but it would have guaranteed 3 more Daring class destroyers because no one would have wanted to cancel Diana. It would have been like, no, you can't cancel HMS Diana. Senator, how would the Iron use 1 weak battleship tech for cruiser destroyers and the carrier scale accordingly? Oh, destroyer spam. But guys, did the Tribals get to deal with Japanese kamikazes in the Indian Ocean and basically Southeast Asia? They did. They did okay. They didn't get hit by any of them, but they did. By the time they were there, there weren't really a lot of Japanese kamikazes heading out of Malaya to attack them. But last week, don't see. An idea for a short, hopefully, video. The evolutionary Iron Pennant Citizen. Why carriers are. Oh, it's not short. That's short. Why do they have 1 thick funnel and 1 thin? It's to do with the placement of the engine, of the boiler rooms and the engines and how they're rained out. Basically, that one has 2. The forward funnel has 2 sets feeding into it. The aft funnel has 1 set. Colin Cameron, after listening to the Birch Pumps, it makes me think that you're going to campaign for the Iron small caliber railgun ships to be a new free turret twin gun tribal class destroyers. Maybe. I'm sorry, like cancelling Dory Miller. Yes, you can't cancel. There is a reason why the U.S. Navy is not worried about how many of the how many carriers they're going to get up to the Doris Miller. He is well deserving of a carrier being named after him, very much. But it's a giant 5th rail that no one dares cancel. And the US Navy has put it in there literally for that reason. They didn't want anyone to cancel their carrier program. They've made sure no one can cancel their carrier program up until that point. And they're probably frantically trying to search for other names for future ships that they can add onto it. Although the Type 83 should be named the Geogonoma class, it should be. Right then. So I'm going to finish off answering any questions you have, and then I'm going to basically, in about 15 minutes or 20 to 10 my time, I'm going to call it a night because well, I'll go and put the dogs to bed because I just had a message saying doggy's getting sleepy. So, questions, please. Last questions. Hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoy this book if you've got it. If you haven't got it, I hope you're going to get it. And thank you. And as I said again, the dream is to visit Haida, and they're just such pretty ships. They are. Oh, they are good looking ships. They're really good looking. She's a good looking girl. She is very, very pretty. Look at those lines. You don't get lines like that these days on ships. Mm-hmm. Or it's dainty as in something tasty? No, it's dainty as in it would dance around you. And that's got HMS Duke of York has definitely been thrown out of as a name to avoid having a ship cancelled now. Yep. But I really do think the Royal Navy should have announced the ninth daring class destroyer was going to be HMS Diana. I hope we're not too PC to have a monarchy class ships. Besides, we have the Queen Elizabeth. And we have the Duke of Lancaster, HMS Lancaster, named for the Queen. So the Queen technically has two ships in the service and Navy. How much is DVD? I think it's roughly. It depends. The price on the cover says £30 recommended retail price, but we'll see. Yeah, it's ought to visit Cavalier too, but even more cost and time. Cavalier is always cool to go visit. I go visit. Luckily, where I live, I can drive to Cavalier, and I can drive to Chatham. I can drive to Portsmouth without too much trouble. But guys, what do you think of the Ukrainian crisis? Listen to bilge pumps. We go on about the Ukrainian crisis. I was asking, okay, everything that Google Translate produced me when looking for dainty is more or less food related. Doesn't surprise me. Sure, quick, last question. Would Henderson have been proud of the work the tribals did? Yes. They worked exactly as he wanted them to. This is Foxo. How effective was an air attack against capital units in World War II? A lot is made of successful attacks against battleships, but never how many attacks failed. That's the $1,000,000 question, and it's the real problem when people start doing it, because you remember the successful attacks because a battleship gets sunk. The unsuccessful attacks where the ships don't get sunk, they don't really think about. And that's the really interesting problem when you're looking at World War II and you start talking about the war, you start talking about the lessons of air attack on ships. People tend to focus on the Pacific lessons. And actually, to an extent, for today, you can argue the Mediterranean is more suitable because you have this ongoing constant attacks coming in. So in the Pacific, the battles would be short and sharp, but they'd be a day at most, usually. But they'd be very heavy for that day. The Mediterranean campaigns would go on for weeks. The air attacks non-stop, coming in every day, all day for, days on end, if not weeks on end. So there's a difference in the system. And there's a difference in the style of operation you do for it. And it's less spectacular, but it's there. So, yeah, there could be lots of attacks in. And that's what's forgotten when we look at the Mediterranean. And that, yes, a battleship gets hit. That's terrible. It's really annoying. It spoils trouble. But that's like, it's had 3 dozen attacks on it in that time period, and they've managed to get one through. It's almost becoming the law of large numbers. And John Sodden Knight should have announced Diana as the 12th daring. Jack, Hart says username of DDs and commanders from Samar. Mine says they will use a Medal of Honor replacements or recipients from recent wars. Mm-hmm. Ian Stradling, I can see your point, but I'm fairly sure Philip, being the practical man he was, and the Queen, being the very sensible person she is, would understand the Royal Navy's motive and probably think that it would be fun to play to do it on the politicians. Besides, Diana has a traditional name in the Royal Navy, so the Royal Navy could claim its, claim innocence. They've just gone for one of their traditional D-class names. The fact that the public and the press would probably associate with something, it's kind of like HMS Queen Elizabeth. It's actually technically named for the first Queen Elizabeth, but, Does Vox, so would you do an audiobook version of your book so I can look like I'm listening in class and actually learn something? I think Drax already offered to record that if I wanted to, and we'll have a look. I've had a chat with Pen and Sword. If enough sell, they will do an audiobook version, but enough of books have to sell to make it viable. To therefore, that an audiobook would be viable. So I'm not sure if we have time to travel to Collingwood, which sounds like it might be a good idea. Hmm. Nice, did you see the list of Type 45 names I put in chat? No. Thomas Palestini, why were the last few tribals cancelled? Is it because the battles entering service or just no more need for them? Battles, basically. The battles were considered a better wartime design because they had the 4.5s, which were very useful guns. And then after that, there was the Darings. Shamak, so the aliens have set up a base near Perth. Should I try to assault it, or should I leave them there for months so they will be willing to sign a truce after dealing with the Aussie wildlife? I would dispatch the emus and the other Aussie wildlife to do the attack first, and then mop up what's left with your own troops. Comments, any news on the Type 83 submission yet? Not yet. It should be up soon. Azoski, oh dear, just imagine what will happen if the RN named their ships after food. Our force consists of HMS Cookie, Biscuit, and Pizza. Equivalent. Second, why isn't Queen Elizabeth named after Queen Elizabeth II? Because you don't name ships after the sitting monarch. Although the Royal Navy has got round that by having the HMS Duke of Lancaster, the Type 23. And of course, the Queen is technically the Duke of Lancaster. Well, she is the Duke of Lancaster. That's the reason why she's monarch. The British monarchy is the Duke of Lancaster is the Duchy of monarchy, Duchy of Lancaster that provides the monarch. That's the senior duchy. I think the next 5 Type 45s were to be Diane, Dalmatian, Dainty, and Decoy. I don't think Dalmatian would have been as ever for a Royal Navy, and I'm not sure about Demon, but Dainty and Decoy definitely are on the list. Demon they don't usually go with because the Royal Navy's pretty Christian. Chance, hello. How would the German interwar navy fight against the Russians in the Baltic? How long could pre-dreadnoughts and panzer chiefs survive against the Ganguts? Not very long, but they probably do. They probably put up quite a fight with their destroyers and their fast attack boats. Nice. So, has the Hood Questions Long Patrol coming soon? Potentially. You have sent in rather a lot of those recently. What do you think of the Type 23? I'm biased. My father built them. But especially the ones Montrose and successors on, well, he modified the design heavily. I think did a good job. And they're good ships. They've served well. Secretary, what? Wasn't the first King George V named after the sitting monarch? No. Remember, there was a King George VI. by that point. King George VI changed it so that it would be named after King George V. It would be named for King George V. Previous to that, there had been a tradition of naming battleships after the sitting monarch, but he decided he wanted it to be named after his father, which is why we've had two classes of ships called the King George V class. And we are about to have another ship, which is King George V, which is going to be a Dreadnought class SSBN. There's Voxer. How would you recommend getting into history on a deep level? Someone who has not gone to school for history and is still in uni for no history courses. Find an area of history you're interested in and use that as your starting point. And then go, when you're reading a book, note down what questions you come up with, and then try and find the books that are relevant to those questions. And if you have questions about what books that might be, please message me, and I'm happy to answer. And if I don't know, I'll probably have a friend, someone who does. Sam Thompson, would she not be the Duchess, not Duke of Lancaster? Not when you're the monarch. You then become the Duke. It's fun times. Rick Duck Clarke. Talking about air attacks against camper ships. Wasn't the first wave sent to sink the Yamato and that was found abandoned in the hundreds and they did not outright sink it? I think it's roughly like that. I haven't looked at the battle at that time. Minnesota, the Queen is a Duke. I thought that the Duke was the title for a male. Queen gets to call herself what she wants. And I think she's the Duke of Lancaster. She might be the Duchess of Lancaster, but I think she starred the Duke of Lancaster. It's because of the history of the titles, because of the Wars of the Roses, and that's why usually, and this is another reason why the order of seniority goes Lancaster, Cornwall, hence that's the Prince of Wales duchy. York has been dropped down. Edinburgh. Then it's Norfolk, I think, or Northumberland. Yeah, basically you go down the list, and there is a huge debate once you get into them over which one's more senior than the others. I take it the House of Lancaster defeated the Yorkists. Yeah. Ooh, well, that's a whole thing because technically it's the Tudors that beat the Yorkists, and Tudors take on the title of the Duchy of Lancaster as they're technically the surviving heirs, but they were also technically disinherited because of how they claim their descendants. So it's an interesting, fun time. And Dan Freeman, they're not even the last possibility standing. There are others. Not even around when the tuners are. It's a fun time of history. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone. And I'm going to say thank you. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed. The cruiser video is already recorded and ready for Tuesday, so that's already loaded up. I've been loading other ones. I'm going to re-record parts of the Glorious Heritage class because I've had some very kind people checking through that for me, and they've come up with some points, and so I'm going to re-record it. And then, as I said before, if there's enough people who are interested in it, there might well be a live on the discussion of the class of ships in Andromeda series. And thank you very much. Thank you. This folks, did anyone try spinal mounts on wet Navy ships, and what do you think of them on spaceships? To an extent, and they're probably sensible. Right. Take care, everyone. Thank you, Night Heron Productions. Thank you, George Newman. Thank you, Dan Freeman. And thank you, Alzowski, Melanie 1640. Glorious what class? Glorious Heritage class cruisers. AKA Andromeda. Ascendant. Have fun. Thank you, Yelby Sage. Thank you, Bud Guy 89. And thank you, Anuk. Thank you, DG40. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you've had fun. And thank you. Take care, everyone. Take care, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Paul Johnson. Thank you, Stafford, Dan, Sean, for doing an admin role and doing the admin tonight. And thank you very much, everyone, for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and hope to see you on Thursday. Take care. Bye. Bye, Zachary Gherkin. Bye, Stafford. And bye, Carl. Thank you. And thank you, Stafford, for all the work you've been doing. Thank you.